Chapter 267. In the Imperial Palace, Mada knelt on the ground, and his face almost touched the floor. He even breathed cautiously, for fear of breaking Dongfang Zhao's heart. My eighth brother didn't have any reaction and just agreed. And he even prepared the dowry by himself? You even set the date? 2 days later? There was a faint smile on Dongfang Zhao's face, but the coldness in his words was so cold that Eunuch Feng couldn't help but shiver and bend his back even more. Your Majesty, what I said is true. The Eighth Lord only hesitated for a moment and directly took the imperial edict without any other excessive reaction. Eunuch Feng was also there at that time. If I lied, I would be struck by lightning. Enough. Dongfang Zhao impatiently interrupted Mada's words. He stomped a few steps with a gloomy face. Suddenly, he picked up the memorial on the table and smashed it on Mada's head. He scolded, "Useless thing, get out of here." Mada immediately got up from the ground and said while retreating, "Your Majesty, please calm down. I'll get out now. I'll get out now." At this moment, he breathed a sigh of relief in his heart. His Majesty was willing to scold him, which meant that the Ma family could completely withdraw from the whirlpool of the situation and would not be punished again. He had been with Dongfang Zhao for many years. Although he didn't know his temperament completely, he could at least understand 70% of his thoughts. Although Dongfang Zhao was extremely angry at this time, in fact, His Majesty also knew that this time his decision was wrong. Lingli was just the person he chose according to His Majesty's will. But now when the imperial edict came out, Lord Rue's mansion not only didn't resist, but also happily prepared the dowry. Such a development was almost beyond everyone's expectation. The situation of the royal family is getting more and more complicated. It's not easy to get involved. With this thought in mind, Mada unconsciously walked to the gate of the palace. He looked back at the majestic and spectacular main gate of the palace. He couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. Then he walked away. At the same time, the imperial study of the palace was still so quiet that even the sound of a needle falling could be heard. Dongfang Zhao turned around and sat in front of the table. He gently picked up a thick roll of files, which were all about the countermeasures after Dongfang Rue raised the army to rebel. He originally thought it was quite brilliant, but now it was all waste paper. Eighth brother. Oh, eighth brother. You really hit it well. Even I, your brother, have underestimated you. Looking at the information of Dongfang Rue, Dongfang Zhao sneered and said, "Everyone thinks that you love your daughter as much as your life. But at the critical moment, you don't hesitate to sell your daughter. It's really embarrassing for me. Your Majesty, excessive anger will harm your body." The groom's dress was extremely complicated. Lingli sat for a long time. In the afternoon, Ling Ping, who was in a military uniform, returned to the Ling mansion. When he saw Lingli, he couldn't help but tease him. "Brotherly, you look like a talented man in this dress, but your expression is not quite right. Why are you so nervous? Others may think that you are going to the battlefield." Lingli heard the words and smiled bitterly. "Second brother, don't tease me anymore. I am nervous enough." "Hey, brotherly, you're wrong." Ling Ping waved his hand and said seriously, "You are the son of the Ling family. You can't show fear at any time. Ping?" Before Ling Ping finished his words, Qiu Ming had already walked in. She rolled her eyes at him and said, "Don't make fun of your brother. If you have the ability, find one yourself. I want to see how you can be calm." Since his mother said so, Ling Ping immediately became timid. He shrank his neck and didn't dare to say more. When Lingli saw this scene, his heavy heart finally relaxed a little. He reluctantly showed a smile, but his expression made Ling Ping frown slightly. When Qiu Ming went out again, there were only Lingli and Ling Ping in the room. Lingli glanced at his mother, who walked far outside the room. He took off his armor and squatted down to look at Lingli. He said seriously, "Brotherly, I think you are not right. Tell me the truth. Is there anything you are hiding from me?" Lingli was stunned. There were too many things he was hiding from his second brother. He didn't know which one Ling Ping was talking about, so he couldn't give a response. Ling Ping thought that Lingli was self-abased. He couldn't help but sigh secretly. He patted the blanket covering Ling Li's legs and said, "Don't worry. I have seen countless people. Miss Su is really pure. Since she is willing to marry you, she will not dislike you. Lingli suddenly understood and didn't know what to feel for a while. He had hidden this pair of legs from his family for 10 years. No one knew how many years he would hide it in the future. Second brother, I understand. Lingli answered in a low voice. Ling Ping was helpless, but he didn't continue to persuade him. Rome wasn't built in a day. Brother Li's legs had been disabled for so many years. If he could still maintain his confidence, it would be really strange. After seeing his brother, Ling Ping went back to the room and changed into a suit of casual clothes. He immediately came out to help Xiaoming decorate. He came back for two purposes. One was to act as a facade for his brother, and the other was, the border of Nanjiang country is restless. Maybe I have to go to war immediately after Brother Li gets married. I'd better tell my family after Brother Li gets married. Ling Ping shook his head to dispel distracting thoughts. He had been to the battlefield many times. Now his brother's marriage was the most important thing. Other things were not in his consideration. At night, Ling Li lay on the bed, tossing and turning. He couldn't sleep at all. In the middle of the night, all the people in the Ling mansion fell into a deep sleep. Ling Li got up from the bed and opened the secret compartment under the wardrobe. A set of black clothes came into view, but before he could take off the wedding robe, he was stopped by a pair of hands. Master, Madam has told me that it's better not to see the bride before getting married. It's inauspicious. Lingamo said helplessly with dark eyes. Besides, Madam spent a whole day dressing you up. She even let you sleep with your clothes on tonight. If you take off your clothes like this, you will definitely reveal your flaws tomorrow. Ling Li's eyes darkened. He hesitated for a moment and finally let go of the black clothes. He didn't know whether it was the former sentence or the latter sentence that moved him. Seeing Ling Li give up, Lingamo couldn't help but breathe a sigh of relief and immediately put away the black clothes. Lingamo, do you think Su Li really wants to marry me? Master, you asked the wrong person. If you want to know, isn't it better to ask Madam in person tomorrow? Madam? Ling Li laughed at himself. He turned around and lay down with his eyes closed. Regardless of whether he slept or not, the night would eventually pass. It was the 5th day of March. It was a good day to get married. The whole Yunjing city was bustling early in the morning. The street in front of the Ling mansion was crowded. If the government didn't maintain the order, even the sedan chair for the bride could not go out. People could hear the discussion everywhere in the street. Everyone knew that the first beauty in Yunjing city was going to marry the first playboy in Yunjing city today. When the imperial edict was just issued, almost all the young talents in Yunjing city beat their chests and stamped their feet. They were so angry that they almost wanted to go to the Ling mansion and kill the good-for-nothing. But the imperial edict issued the marriage. Even if they had 100 guts, they didn't dare to destroy the wedding banquet. After several days of preparation, the marriage between Lord Rui's mansion and the Ling family had become the topic of conversation in the whole Yunjing city. It was not strange that there were so many people on the wedding day. Chapter 268. In front of the gate of Lord Rui's mansion, the wedding procession stopped slowly under the gaze of many people. The maids who were watching at the gate immediately dispersed. They're here. They're finally here. Mammy Li was also dressed in red today. She had been with Su Li all the time. Now that Su Li was getting married, she would accompany her and take care of Su Li's daily life. Seeing the handsome young man sitting on the horse, Mammy Li was overjoyed. She knew some details about Ling Li. At this moment, she couldn't help but secretly rejoice for Su Li that she found such a powerful husband. Under the watchful eyes of everyone, Ling Li was carried down from the special seat of the horse by Ling Mo and put on the wheelchair. He was more nervous and excited. He took a deep breath and barely kept calm. He rocked the wheelchair alone and entered Lord Rui's mansion. He came to the door of Su Li's courtyard unimpeded. Ling Li was surprised. He had also attended many weddings of big families in Yunjing City. The bridegroom would encounter a lot of difficulties when he came to marry the bride, but he didn't encounter many obstacles. Did Lord Rui treat him differently because of the imperial edict? Or, at this moment, suddenly, a horrible strong wind swept behind him. Ling Li's pupils shrank and countless thoughts flashed in his mind. Finally, His tense body suddenly relaxed, and he didn't intend to resist. Hum. With a cold hum, the strong wind suddenly disappeared when it approached Ling Li's back. Ling Li narrowed his eyes slightly. The strength dissipated so easily. This person didn't intend to hurt him at all. Was it a test? Ling Li pretended to be confused and looked back. But when he saw the face of the person behind him, the confusion on his face instantly turned into astonishment. The person was dressed as a servant. He looked young and didn't seem to be 18 or 19 years old. He looked cold and quite similar to Ling Imo. But compared with Ling Imo, the expression on his face was much more complicated. Are you Fang Yuan? Ling Li found out the name of this person in his mind. Then he noticed that the latter's pneuma was as obscure as the abyss. He was suddenly shocked. He still remembered that when he met Fang Yuan in the Desu town, he hadn't even broken through the inborn hurdle. Now he had the cultivation above the inborn 6th hurdle. It was just over a year. Such a span was really exaggerated. Thinking of Su Li's rapid progress in these years, he suddenly realized that Fang Yuan had been with Su Li all the time. Child Ling, with your intelligence, it is not difficult to guess my purpose today. Fang Yuan's face was cold and his tone was full of killing intent. He said, You have hurt her once. If you dare to hurt her in the future, I will exhaust all my knowledge and kill you even if I chase you to the ends of the earth. Ling Li raised his eyebrows slightly. He seemed to be relaxed, but his heart was slightly heavy. He saw from Fang Yuan's eyes. Because he saw the same thing from Fang Yuan's eyes. For Su's heart, of Li Ling Rue Ling Ling, Li A, of King of Ling Li's Fang, he. Thinking of this, Ling Li took a slight breath and exhaled the cold air in his body. It seemed that Ling Li's anxiety and irritation in the past 3 days were gone. In front of Fang Yuan, he finally recovered some calmness as a hierarch of a great sect. I never want to hurt her. If you come here just to warn me, then you can get out of the way. Fang Yuan frowned, but he was reluctant to get out of the way. His beloved woman was behind the door. She would marry the man in front of him today. If he could, he would rather stand here all his life and never give way. However, everything that was happening right now was her idea. Fang Yuan was a little bitter. After his family was ruined, he wandered from place to place with his sister. He thought that he had suffered all kinds of hardships in the world. But today he knew that there was another kind of bitterness. It was extremely bitter and more unbearable than all the previous ones. Remember what I said. Fang Yuan finally got out of the way. Ling Li took a deep look at Fang Yuan, whose eyes were as sharp as a blade. Then he entered the yard in his wheelchair. In the new yard, Su Li wore a red veil and sat quietly at the stone table. Mammy Li had come to the yard in advance and waited for Su Li. She was very happy. Originally, the bride was supposed to wait in the room, but the miss said that she didn't want to. Finally, she waited in the yard. The emperor's marriage was a symbol of destiny. At the moment, time was tight. So many rules were omitted. So, this rule was not a big deal. After a while, the sound of the wheelchair came into their ears. Mammy Li's face immediately brightened. She came forward and said happily, Child, you are finally here. Ling Li saw that Su Li was sitting in the yard, and he couldn't help but be astonished. In this way, she probably heard every word of the voice outside the yard. Mammy Li didn't notice Ling Li's reaction. She walked to the back of the wheelchair and pushed Ling Li to Su Li. She said, Child, don't be in a daze. You should take the miss out. Don't delay the time. Mammy Li took the red ribbon and stuffed one end into Su Li's hands. Then she handed the other end to Ling Li. Ling Li immediately reacted. He clenched the red ribbon that was connected with Su Li and nodded. Mammy, you are right. Let's go out. Oh, okay. Mammy Li promised with a smile. She helped Ling Li push the wheelchair to the gate. But she laughed in her heart. Child Ling, who was so high-spirited in the yard in the valley, was so nervous today. He didn't even know how to speak. It was really interesting. When they came out of the yard again, Ling Li didn't see Fang Yuan again. He clenched the red ribbon in his hand and turned his head. His eyes never left Su Li. Although he couldn't see Su Li's face, he knew that it was Su Li just by looking at her figure. Today, Su Li was not as fierce and crazy as she was in the osmanthus forest that day. She walked lightly and followed the wheelchair step by step. She seemed quiet and gentle. In a trance, Lingli returned to the days when he and Suli traveled together in Yunjing. They only envied the Mandarin ducks, but not the immortals. Unfortunately, those days had been fragmented with the disaster. A group of 3 people walked to the gate of Lord Rue's mansion. The people who had been waiting immediately became noisy. The noise was endless. Come out! Come out! Princess Li is coming. Princess Li must be dressed very beautifully. It's a pity that the playboy of the Ling family got lucky. We have no chance to see her. Hateful. Hateful. How could Ling Li be so lucky? I really envy him. Dongfang Rue saw the 3 people coming out. When he saw Ling Li's appearance, he couldn't help but feel relieved. He could see that Ling Li really liked his daughter. At least, Li would not be wronged if she joined the Ling mansion. After Suli got into the sedan chair, the MC of the Ministry of Right shouted, "Start the sedan chair." The wedding procession set off to go back. The people who were watching followed the wedding procession. The whole street was moving with them. Soon, the gate of Lord Rue's mansion became deserted. Dongfang Rue was full of complex feelings. He took a long breath and said, "Let's go." "Yes, master." Ubin secretly wiped away his tears and felt sorry for his master. Just because of an imperial edict, Miss had to marry into such a shady marriage. Master must be very sad in his heart. After 2 hours, the wedding procession was like a long dragon. It finally stopped in front of the Ling mansion. When Ling Li turned his wheelchair and stopped in front of the sedan chair, the MC of the Ministry of Rights immediately shouted, "Start the sedan chair." The bride and groom get up. Bow. Ling Li immediately cupped his hands to the sedan chair and looked attentive. Mammy Li looked solemn, but her eyes were sparkling with joy. Mammy Li lifted the curtain of the sedan chair and let Suli come out. Then she handed the red ribbon to Suli again. The bride and groom, go straight to the front of the flower hall. Burn incense. Kneel down. Kowtow once, twice, and thrice. The MC's voice continued. After they burned incense, they went through a series of complicated rules. Finally, they came to the main hall of the Ling mansion. At a glance, Ling Li saw his grandma, Ms. Gu, sitting on the right side. She smiled so much that the wrinkles on her face gathered together. On the left side, Dongfang Rue looked sad and happy. Xiao Ming and Ling Ping stood beside Ms. Gu. There was joy in Ling Ping's eyes, but he was still calm. Xiao Ming had already burst into tears and cried. Bow to heaven and earth. The MC's voice was long. Ling Li turned his wheelchair and turned his back to the hall. He hesitated for a moment and wanted to get down from the wheelchair. People in the Ling mansion saw this scene, and they immediately changed their expressions. Even the whispers among the audience became smaller. In a blink of an eye, the hall was silent. What's wrong with Li? He is ill. He can bow from afar. Why does he get down? Xiao Ming was anxious and wanted to go forward, but she was stopped by Ling Ping. Mother, I think Brother Li just doesn't want to have any regrets. Let him go. Even if he falls, he is willing. If you help him, Brother Li will feel uncomfortable. Xiao Ming's heart was twisted. She said, "Silly boy, why didn't he tell me anything? Even if I prepared a crutch for him, it would be much better than now." Ling Qinglan, who was also in the audience seat, saw this scene and couldn't help but shake his head slightly. Ling Li clearly knew that the deeper he fell in love, the more painful he would be in the future, but he didn't mean to give up. People who fell in love were difficult to understand. At least he couldn't understand. Thinking of this, Ling Qinglan's lips moved slightly, and a sound was transmitted to Ling Li. To ensure that there is no mistake, you sealed your tendons and meridians yesterday. Now your legs are really useless. If you want to kneel down from the wheelchair without exposing your cultivation, you will be embarrassed a lot. It's better to forget it. Ling Li lowered his head and gritted his teeth. He tried to prop up his upper body without any pause. Ling Qinglan frowned. His voice was clearly transmitted to Ling Li, but Ling Li didn't seem to hear it at all. Ling Li moved too slowly. Gradually, there were whispers among the people who watched the ceremony. What's going on? How can he marry Suli? What a shame. I can't stand it. Hush, keep your voice down. Ling Li heard every word. His face was slightly gloomy. Every word was like a knife stabbing his heart. He began to speed up. It didn't matter that he lost face, but he didn't want Suli to be laughed at with him. However, it was difficult for a person whose cultivation and strength were sealed to get down from the wheelchair with only his hands. As expected, Ling Li's hands suddenly lost balance before long. Chapter 269. There was a loud noise. The wheelchair fell to the ground, and Ling Li also fell from it. The maids were so scared that they covered their eyes. Many kind-hearted onlookers also turned their heads and couldn't bear to see it. Just at this moment, a pair of seemingly delicate hands suddenly appeared and held Ling Li's waist tightly, making him kneel on the ground steadily. Maybe because of the big movement, the red veil slipped off. Su Li's beautiful face was immediately seen by everyone, which made them exclaim in amazement. What a beautiful girl! Princess Li is really a beauty. I really envy the third master of the Ling family. There was a lot of discussion in the hall. In the blink of an eye, the scandal of Ling Li was overshadowed. Ling Li stared at Su Li. It seemed that time was stagnant when they looked at each other. Wow! Another burst of exclamation pulled Ling Li back to reality. It turned out that the onlookers looked back and set off a small climax. Xiaoming saw the scene in the hall and immediately breathed a sigh of relief. She looked at Su Li more kindly than before and even a little more grateful. Su Li's master was the imperial preceptor. Her cultivation was also among the best among many misses in Yunjing City. It was said that she had acquired the 8th hurdle. Although she had never seen Su Li's skills, if she only helped Ling Li to stabilize his body, the red veil on her head would not fall off. This girl did it on purpose to help Ling Li out of trouble. Mrs. Gu looked more sincere with a faint smile on her face. She looked at Su Li very kindly and said, "It's a blessing of our Ling family that you can help my grandson so unobtrusively. You are so considerate." When Mammy Li picked up the red veil and covered Su Li's face again, the 3 bows could finally continue without any hindrance. Second, bow to your parents. Husband and wife bow to each other. The ceremony is finished. Send them to the bridal chamber. With the MC's last words, Dongfang Rui and Ms. Gu both breathed a sigh of relief at the same time. The old and the young looked at each other for a moment and smiled. Both of them had unknown meanings. Xiaoming burst into tears. She leaned against Ling Ping, crying and laughing. She murmured, "Great, great. Li finally has a family. It's great." After Mammy Li led Su Li out of the main hall, the banquet began. The banquet spread from the courtyard of the main hall to both sides of the street outside the Ling mansion, attracting a large number of ordinary people to come to the banquet. It could be said that on this day, because of the marriage between the Ling mansion and the Lord Rui's mansion, almost half of Yunjing City was lively. Ling Li sat back in the wheelchair with the help of Ling Imo. As soon as he came out of the seats in the inner hall, he was surrounded by a group of young talents. "Young royal prince, let me toast you." "Congratulations, young royal prince, for winning the beauty. Come, young royal prince, today is your big day, so you can't refuse wine." Ling Li smiled and drank the wine without saying anything. Others thought he was really happy. Only Ling Imo, who was beside the wheelchair, knew that he was not as happy as he looked at the moment. "All right. The young royal prince is indeed straightforward. Here's another toast to you." Ling Li almost didn't refuse anyone. He sealed his cultivation, and soon he was drunk. His eyes were hazy. Ling Imo looked at him and wanted to help him drink. At this moment, there was a burst of hearty laughter outside the courtyard. "Ha ha ha, it's so lively." Many civil and military officials who were familiar with the voice immediately changed their expressions. They put down the wine and dishes in their hands, came to the gate, and knelt down. "Welcome, Your Majesty." "Welcome, Your Majesty." "Long live the Emperor." Dongfang Rui and others at the main table in the hall changed their expressions slightly. They immediately came out and happened to meet Dongfang Xiao, who just came in from the gate. Mrs. Gu narrowed her eyes slightly and returned to normal in an instant. She walked over with her crutch and was about to salute, saying, "Your Majesty." Dongfang Xiao quickly held Mrs. Gu and smiled hypocritically. "You are so polite. I'm really flattered." Mrs. Gu raised her eyebrows and pretended to sigh. It's rare that your majesty can call me sister-in-law. Dongfang Xiao became serious and said solemnly, eldest brother, I will never forget your kindness in those years. Now you and I are old, and many people have passed away. If I don't get close to you, who else can I talk to? Dongfang Zhao's words seemed to be sincere, which made many guests feel sentimental. It turned out that the emperor had such a relationship with the Ling family. It was not easy for the emperor to keep his original intention after so many years. Mrs. Gu's expression was not very good at the moment. She could only force a smile and said, Your Majesty, you are busy with state affairs. This time, you not only arrange a marriage for my grandson, but also attend the wedding banquet in person. I'm really honored. Please sit in the inner hall. Dongfang Xiao squinted and nodded. Okay. Ling Ping followed at the end with a respectful look, but a cold light flashed in his eyes from time to time. Dongfang Xiao really deserved to be the emperor for decades. He was eloquent, but he didn't come to pay homage to his grandfather in these years. After a group of people entered the house, the courtyard became boisterous again, and it became more boisterous than before. Many people were talking about various things that the Ling family fought for the Dahan country in those years. Some people even whispered and talked about the secrets of those years. I heard that back then, His Majesty and old General Ling became sworn brothers, and the two brothers worked together to conquer this great land. His Majesty originally had the status of a powerful family, and it was only because old General Ling purposely gave way that the position of emperor fell to His Majesty. Later, old General Ling got married and established a career. Like father, like son. General Ling also made great achievements for the Dahan country. Your Majesty promised the title of Lord of North to General Ling plus the legend of Mrs. Ling. General Ling's mansion was respected. The old people chatted in private, but the young people still surrounded Lingli to toast. At this moment, Lingli was extremely drunk. If he didn't sit in a wheelchair and was accompanied by Ling Imo, he would have been lying on the table. Among this group of people, the young man who made the most effort to toast saw this scene. He felt it was enough and made a gesture. Not long after, a young girl with a graceful figure leisurely walked over. Many young geniuses were stunned when they saw her. Wasn't she the miss of General Wu's mansion, Wu Xiuxiu? She was almost molested by Lingli in those years. She should avoid the Ling mansion. Why did she appear here? Ling Imo was shocked and felt that something was wrong, but it was too late for him to stop her. Wu Xiuxiu was anxious to obey Dongfang Zhao's order. She showed a hint of bitterness on her face. Her soft words made many child's hearts flutter. Although Wu Xiuxiu's appearance was not as good as that of Su Li, the fairy in the human world, her charm was not possessed by ordinary women. Childling, I haven't seen you for a long time. I didn't expect that you were going to get married. Lingli put down the glass and turned his head. There was a trace of doubt on his flushed face. He stammered, Who are you? As soon as he said this, people around immediately burst into laughter. They thought that Wu Xiuxiu's appearance could make Lingli, who was lustful, embarrassed. Unexpectedly, it was Wu Xiuxiu who was embarrassed instead of Lingli. You. Wu Xiuxiu was so angry that she wanted to leave. But when she thought of Dongfang Zhao's order, she had to bear it. She continued to test. Lingli, don't you even know me? I've seen a lot of men like you, eating from the bowl while looking at the pot. If I'm willing to be your second wife, won't you agree? Even Wu Xiuxiu felt that her face was burning when she said such shameless words. If it weren't for her family, she wouldn't come here to say these disgusting words to this good-for-nothing. Others didn't know what she was thinking, but after her words, more people gathered around to watch. Miss Wu thinks highly of herself. I didn't expect that she could say such words. It's really an eye-opener for me. I think Miss Wu just comes to test Lingli because of jealousy. She wants to make Princess Li embarrassed. If Lingli really covets her, then Princess Li, tut-tut. Lingli is lustful. I don't think it's possible. Princess Li will be humiliated before they consummate their marriage. Wu Xiuxiu snorted and crossed her arms in front of her chest. She waited for Lingli to show his embarrassment. She specially dressed up in order to seduce Lingli. At this moment, Lingli was drunk. Even if he was sober, he would have an impulse. Ling Imo stood beside the wheelchair and was expressionless like a block of wood. He didn't mean to stop her at all. He had already seen the purpose of Wu Xiuxiu's coming. No matter whether there was someone behind her, what he wanted to know was whether Lingli was sincere in this marriage. If it was sincere, there was no flaw. Even if someone wanted to make a fuss about the marriage, there was no breakthrough. If not, thinking of this, Ling Imo smiled slightly. Crack. Lingli suddenly stared. It seemed that his reverse scale was touched. His red face was full of anger. He directly smashed the wine glass in his hand. He pointed at Wu Xiuxiu's nose and scolded, "Where do you come from? Get out of here." The whole scene suddenly became quiet. No one expected that Lingli would suddenly get angry. Wu Xiuxiu was even more stunned by the sudden scolding. Before she responded, Lingli suddenly retracted his hand and hammered his chest fiercely. He shouted, "I only love Suli in my life and will only marry her. Since God allows me to marry her, I will never touch any other woman in my life. If I break this oath, I will be struck by lightning. You, who do you think you are? You can't even compare with Suli. Do you want me to marry you?" Wu Xiuxiu was at a loss for a moment. She didn't expect that Lingli would react like this. Puff. Ha ha ha. After a moment of silence, someone finally couldn't help laughing. Wu Xiuxiu's eyes suddenly turned red. She didn't remember Dongfang Zhao's order in her mind. She cried and ran all the way out of the Ling mansion. There was a smile on Ling Mo's indifferent face. He persuaded helplessly, "Master, you can't drink anymore. It's almost time. You have to consummate your marriage in the evening. Young masters, please excuse me." Chapter 270. After 5 minutes, Ling Imo pushed the wheelchair into the east courtyard. The noise of the main hall courtyard came from far away, which made the east courtyard particularly quiet. Ling Imo looked around and didn't find anyone except the hidden guards of the Yinma cult. He reached out to draw out the silver needles from Ling Li's waist, but a hand suddenly stopped him at this moment. Ling Imo was stunned. "Master, aren't you drunk?" Ling Li, who was drunk and unconscious, slowly raised his head. Although his face was still red, his eyes were clear. He said slowly, "Dongfang Shao suddenly arranged a marriage. There are a lot of tricks in it. How can I not prepare a little bit? Even if I seal my cultivation, it is not so easy to get drunk." Then, Ling Li looked at the brightly lit bridal chamber in the courtyard and glanced at Ling Imo, who was still standing aside. Ling Imo immediately understood and left the courtyard. Seeing Ling Li push the door open and turn the wheelchair to go in, Ling Imo sighed in his heart and turned around to disappear into the night. Ling Li gently closed the door and pulled out the silver needles from his waist. The genuine energy in his body ran, and he looked up at the room. The red candles were swaying, and the light made it a little warm. In the translucent curtain, Su Li with a red veil sat on the edge of the bed with a red wedding quilt. She looked very cute. This was the wedding night of him and Su Li. Ling Li's throat rolled. He pushed the wheelchair and stood up. After hesitating for a moment, he opened the curtain and sat beside Su Li. He picked up the wedding scale on the table and was about to lift the red veil. At the moment when he was about to lift it, the red veil suddenly slipped off and floated to the ground. Ling Li stared at the red silk blankly. When he raised his head, he saw a cold face. The cold eyes almost chilled him to the bone. Even the fiery red lips seemed to be frozen, and he couldn't feel any warmth. Dong! The wedding scale fell to the ground. Ling Li was full of bitterness. "Li, you! Ling Li, pay attention to your address." Su Li's eyes were extremely cold. She interrupted Ling Li's words. "Do you still naively think that I will marry you sincerely? The revenge of my aunt is absolutely irreconcilable. If it is not for the overall situation, do you think I will let you go?" Ling Li's heart ached. His face was slightly pale and his eyes were deep. He couldn't say a word for a long time. Su Li forcibly suppressed the discomfort in her heart and then sneered, "Yes, I used you this time to protect Lord Rue's mansion. I will call you husband in front of others in the future." As for others, at this point, Ling Li suddenly caught a glimpse of a shadow outside the door. His eyes immediately changed. He directly held Su Li's waist and lay on the bed. The curtains on both sides fell. At the same time, outside the door, Ling Liui and others squatted in the corner, listening attentively. They stared at the room that was still lit, and the sound transmission was extremely complicated. How? Did you hear anything? Ling Li 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 Ling Ling said. Ling Li courtyard. Ling 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 courtyard. Ling Liu's face changed slightly, and he immediately took people to slip away. When he was about to climb over the wall, he turned back unconsciously and happened to see Ling Imo among a group of maids and servants. Ling Liui was eavesdropping by the window as they did just now. Ling Liui held back his laughter and immediately climbed over the wall. He didn't expect that Ling Li, who had always been insensitive, would gossip like them. In the bed covered by the curtain, Ling Li covered Su Li's mouth with one hand. He listened to the movement outside the room quietly, but he didn't find that his whole body was on Su Li's. Su Li's eyes widened slightly. She was ashamed and annoyed. She pushed Ling Li away. Ling Li didn't stop and hit the wall directly, making a clear sound. A group of maids and servants outside immediately became restless. I heard it. I heard it. What a loud sound. Ling Imo straightened up and looked strange. The sound just now seemed to be that someone hit the wall. Did Su Li fight with the master? Hiss. Ling Li shook his head and sat up from the bed. Su Li felt distressed. She stretched out her hand and woke up in the middle. Then she retracted her hand quickly. Her face was cold again. You are really cruel. Ling Li smiled bitterly and rubbed his head. He lowered his voice and said, There are people peeping outside. At least we need to pretend. Su Li snorted and turned her head away. She curled up in the corner of the quilt and lay down. After a long time, she said faintly, You cannot get out of bed, but don't touch me. Ling Li was a little relieved. He carefully lifted the other end of the quilt, but found that there were red dates and lotus seeds and other things under the quilt. It was so hard that it bumped against his body. He shook his head helplessly and lay directly on the quilt. The room suddenly became quiet, and only their breathing could be heard. After a long time, Ling Li opened his eyes in the quiet room. He turned his head and saw Su Li's black hair bun. He smelled the delicate fragrance of a virgin. He hesitated for a moment and ran the genuine energy to move his body inch by inch. He didn't stop until he was about to touch Su Li. The fragrance was more intense. Ling Li raised his slender hand and wanted to touch Su Li's hair, which was like a waterfall on the quilt. But he stopped at last, for fear that he would wake her up and she would be angry again. Thinking of this, Ling Li's eyes were gentle. He was ready to watch Su Li and wait for the morning quietly while listening to her regular breath. If he could stay with her like this in this life, even if she was serious to him or even hated him, he would be satisfied. The night was destined to be long. Looking at the messy clothes on the ground, if he hadn't slept at all yesterday, he would have thought that he and Su Li had consummated their marriage. He wore a white shirt and got out of bed. Seeing Su Li in a light yellow dress, his face was slightly hot. He didn't sleep at all in the morning. Naturally, he saw the whole process of Su Li changing clothes. After taking off the red wedding robe and gauze, there was only the belly band left. Hurry up and wash and change clothes. It's time to serve tea. Hearing Su Li's voice, Ling Li immediately woke up. He quickly went to the table to wash and took out a black robe from the wardrobe to put it on. But when it came to tie his hair, he was embarrassed. There were laws in Dahan country. The style of a man's hair was completely different before and after marriage, but he only knew this rule. He didn't know the specific style and how to tie his hair. For a moment, Ling Li sat in front of the bronze mirror and looked at himself with disheveled hair. He sighed and didn't do anything. He never thought that one day he would be puzzled by a simple hairstyle. Su Li sat at the round table and waited. Seeing that there was no movement in the inner room for a long time, she got up and walked a few steps lightly. Then she saw Ling Li with soft black hair. His eyes were melancholy, which made him handsome. A trace of softness flashed in her eyes. She walked over quietly, grabbed the comb in Ling Li's hand with her right hand and combed it gently. Ling Li was stunned immediately. Li, don't get me wrong. Su Li didn't raise her head and said faintly, I just do it for myself. At least before the decline of the Dongfang family, you and I can't show any flaws. Ling Li was silent. Although Su Li reminded him of the relationship between them all the time, He couldn't calm down now that Suli was beside him and helped him tie his hair on the first day of their marriage. Well, let's go out. Suli adjusted Ling Li's lapel and turned around to push the wheelchair over. When Ling Li saw his appearance in the mirror, he couldn't help but be stunned. It turned out that the ordinary hair could be so beautiful. Suli's hairstyle seemed to be designed for him. It set off his face perfectly. In addition, there was a wisp of green in the bun. It was really a perfect masterpiece. Li's movements are so skillful. She is faster than me. Chapter 271. Mom, Grandma, have some tea? In the central room, Qiuming and Mrs. Gu looked at Suli, who was kneeling on the ground, and took the tea. Their eyes flashed with love. Especially Qiuming. She really liked Suli from the bottom of her heart. One of you is Ling Li, and the other is Suli. I don't know how to address you. Suli, since you are willing to marry my grandson, the Ling family will treat you well. You will also have a share of the property of the Ling family. Mrs. Gu said, and took out a stack of shop deeds. It seemed that she was going to completely hand over some of the property of the Ling family to Suli. Suli was stunned and quickly waved her hand. Grandma, I just got married. How can I accept the property of the family? I can't accept it. If you really want to give it to me, just give it to my husband. Hearing this, both Mrs. Gu and Qiuming were stunned, especially Qiuming, who was deeply moved. The value of the shop deeds given by Mrs. Gu was not low. They almost accounted for a quarter of the property of the Ling family. Even if it was presented to Lord Rue, it would be important. But Suli refused without hesitation. This child really likes Sanair. Mrs. Gu was also satisfied. She was determined to give up a quarter of the property to help Ling Li and to show Lord Rue. But it was also a kind of test. If Suli immediately accepted it happily, she would not like this little girl. But from the moment she refused, she had really regarded Suli as a member of the Ling family. Okay, don't kneel. Qiuming couldn't help helping Suli up. She pulled Suli and said, the breakfast is ready. It is made by your grandma. Your grandma hasn't cooked for many years. Ling Li helplessly watched Suli being pulled away by his mother. It was just a day after they got married. His status in the family was not much better than that of ordinary servants. If mother knows that it is just a play between Suli and me, Ling Li sighed and didn't dare to think about it. After Qiuming and Suli left, there were only two people in the room. It was Mrs. Gu, Gu Yin. Ling Li turned his head and braced himself to say, Grandma, what can I do for you? Gu Yan's expression was serious, and her voice was piercingly cold, with a bit of the murderous spirit of youth. Suli is a good daughter, and you can't let her down. In the past, you were young and unmarried, so I couldn't control how you spent your time. But now that you are married and have a family, my Ling family values sincerity. If you dare to go to that kind of place again, I won't recognize you as my grandson. Gu Yan's words were serious, and Ling Li couldn't help but be moved. Although he was a little, he didn't care. Ling Li couldn't help but be angry. He grinned and moved his wheelchair closer to Gu Yan's side. He laughed and said, Grandson will remember. Grandma, don't be angry. Mother and the others have gone to eat. Let's go too. Gu Yin saw Ling Li's reaction. It was clear that he didn't take her words seriously. A trace of disappointment flashed in her eyes. She shook her head and got up to walk to the table, but she didn't see Ling Li behind her. He was more than serious. Everything he said was true. The breakfast of the Ling family was extremely rich, and the four people had a good time eating together. Suli behaved very naturally and didn't let Qiuming and Mrs. Gu see any flaws. Ling Li ate quietly, but he felt bitter in his heart. These dishes were picked by Suli. He knew that Suli was just acting. As long as they were alone, she would be beaten back to the original state. But he still couldn't help but hope that everything in front of him was true. How good it would be. After dinner, Suli followed Ling Li back to the east courtyard. Ling Li had been living in seclusion for more than half a year. It was said that he changed his lecherous habits for Suli, so no one thought it was strange. When they returned to the east courtyard, they happened to meet the maids who were cleaning the room. Ling Li glanced at them and was about to go to the study. He saw a maid open the soft cloth on the bed and took out a piece of white cloth dyed with red. Then she hurried away. What's that? Lingli was slightly shocked and quickly thought of something. But before he could respond, he found that his right arm was held by someone and dragged to the other side. At the same time, Suli whispered in his ear, "Honey, aren't you going to show me the collection in the study today? What are you doing?" When his right arm touched the softness, Lingli was a little confused and was immediately dragged away by Suli. The maids envied them again. Master and Madam are inseparable. They are really in love. At this time, the two people who were in love came to the study, but they immediately separated. The atmosphere gradually became stagnant. Lingli frowned and couldn't help but ask, "What's the matter with the red?" Although he had never intercourse with women in his 2 lives, the information on the earth was so advanced in the previous life. Even if he didn't try it himself, he naturally knew the secrets between men and women. Last night, they didn't consummate. How could there be red? Suli looked indifferent and turned her back as if she was looking at the books in the room. She said, "If we don't do this, how can we confuse the fake with the real one? It's just a little blood. Don't worry about it." Lingli became more and more annoyed. His eyes darkened, and he stood up directly from the wheelchair. He pulled Suli's right arm and pulled the sleeve. The strength of the inborn warrior was so great that Suli's right sleeve was completely torn, revealing a fresh wound. "It should be yesterday. Don't you apply medicine to such a deep wound?" Lingli finally knew where the red came from. He was angry and distressed. When he was about to use genuine energy to treat Suli, he was pushed away by Suli. Her cold words pierced his heart like a knife. "You don't need to be hypocritical. I have said that. Except in front of outsiders, we don't interfere with each other. As the hierarch, you are busy. I won't bother you anymore. I will come back in the evening." Then Suli directly opened the tunnel mechanism in the room, jumped down, and disappeared. Lingli stood alone on the edge of the tunnel. After a long time, he raised his head and looked serious. He said, "Li has reached the inborn 9th hurdle. Why didn't the wound heal itself after one night?" Even though every word of Suli made his heart bleed since they met, he didn't complain at all. He was still worried about Suli's safety. Except for Lingli himself, no one knew what he was thinking about. Linli Building. On the first day of Suli's wedding, the door of the Linli Building was closed. In the underground adytum, all the leaders of the Linli Building sat in a circle, including Wen Tingshan. Suli has no choice but to marry into the Ling Mansion. This matter is urgent. No one knows what Suli thinks. What should we do in the future? Chu Qingning sighed and said the confusion in everyone's heart. Fang Yuan looked up at him. His eyes were dim and he didn't speak. "The Ima cult is the culprit who killed my junior sister apprentice. Suli can't be willing to marry into the Ling family. Now it's just a temporary measure. What are you worried about?" Wen Tingshan snorted. Although he had the shortest contact with Suli, he was extremely confident in Suli's temperament. Lingli is the hierarch of the Ima cult. Now Suli is risking her life to marry him. We are also worried. "We don't know when we can see her again," Fang Mu said faintly. In Shuedong and Mei Ruhan were lost. As women, they could understand Suli better. At this moment, Suli must be very uncomfortable. But she couldn't tell Dongfang Rue all this. She could only bear it by herself. "What are you talking about? Why are you so noisy?" Suddenly, the door of the adytum was opened. A figure in white appeared in front of everyone without warning. Everyone was stunned. "Suli? Suli?" Fang Yuan trembled slightly and looked back incredulously. It was only the first morning of the wedding. Suli came to the Linli Building openly? "Why? You seem to be very surprised." Suli sat down expressionlessly and poured herself a cup of tea. She said indifferently, "It's just a temporary measure to marry into the Ling family. There is no possibility between me and Lingli. This time, I just used him." That, In Shuedong stammered and looked at Suli's lower body. Her face was red. What she meant couldn't be more obvious. Suli's reaction was very calm. She just shook her head slightly and said, "It's just cooperation. How can I consummate with him?" Hearing this, Chu Qingning and others couldn't help but cough. Although Suli was open-minded and didn't care about it, they couldn't help but feel embarrassed when they heard such explicit words. Fang Yuan secretly breathed a sigh of relief. But then he felt that the situation was more serious. Although Su Li took advantage of Ling Li's love for her to hide in the Ling mansion, if it went on like this, it was hard to guarantee that they wouldn't. He knew very well that Su Li liked Ling Li very much. If it weren't for that thing, she would have loved Ling Li. Thinking of this, he took a breath and changed the topic. What should we do next? Su Li slightly raised her eyebrows and knocked on the table with her knuckles. She glanced at Wen Tingshan, who was silent, and said, "The top priority is to clear up the worries. How is the investigation of the Wanjian sect going?" In Shuedong shook her head and said disappointedly, "We have cooperated with the Yinma cult, but we still can't find any clues of the Wanjian sect. The people of the Wanjian sect probably left." Really? Su Li didn't say yes or no. A glimmer of light flashed in her eyes. They are not under the protection of the royal family and can avoid the investigation of me and the Yinma cult. If they are still in Yunjing City, there is only one place left. Where else can they go? Chu Qingning frowned. He didn't know where the people of the Wanjian sect could hide. But when Tingshan's face suddenly changed at this moment, "You mean," Su Li smiled coldly, "the spiritual realm? When did the spiritual realm, which has always been indifferent to worldly affairs, intervene in the disputes of the sect?" "Uncle Sean, it seems that the group of people chasing you is more complicated than I thought." Chapter 272. When Tingshan glanced at the confused people, but he didn't mean to explain immediately. Instead, he thought for a moment and said, "Su Li, the situation may not be as serious as you think. The spiritual realm has never cared about the affairs of the world. It doesn't care about the life and death of the forces in the spiritual circle. When Tingyi's people probably stayed in the spiritual realm by special means." "What do you mean?" Su Li had a vague guess in her heart, but she still asked. When Tingshan couldn't help standing up and said, "Let's go there immediately and tell you the details on the way." "I'll go too." Fang Yuan stood up and stared at Su Li with a pair of black eyes firmly. Su Li's eyes flashed, and she suddenly had an idea. She immediately swallowed her refusal and nodded. "Well, let's go now." All three of them were seniors. It was the fastest way to go there, but Su Li needed to save her foundation, so she chose to use a carriage instead of walking. Although when Tingshan didn't know Su Li's intention, he agreed and explained the reason on the way. "When Tingyi is my younger brother. Although we are close relatives, he is indifferent and narrow-minded. His martial arts realm is naturally lower than mine. Not only him, but all the martial artists in the 10,000 Swords Pavilion who are still active should respect me." Fang Yuan was shocked by Wen Tingshan's first sentence. Wen Tingshan was the only senior in the longevity realm in the Linli building. Although he knew he was powerful, he didn't expect that he was the first senior in the Wanjian sect. Su Li nodded expressionlessly and said, "Go on." She was not surprised that Wen Tingshan was the first senior in the spiritual circle in the previous life. Wen Tingshan looked at Su Li with a little surprise. Although he felt strange, it was not the time to care about these details. He recalled what happened in these years and continued to tell with a gloomy expression. Although the token of the head of the Wanjian sect was lost, his strength was there. No one objected to my proposal to be the next head of the Wanjian sect. Perhaps my younger brother noticed that I still had a trace of affection for him in my heart, so he did not hesitate to use it to hurt me. When Tingshan smiled slightly, but his expression was bleak. That night, he colluded with outsiders and gathered more than 40 seniors in the first step of the longevity realm to kill me. If I hadn't broken through from the peak of the first step to the second step of the longevity realm at the critical moment, it would have been impossible for me to escape. Surrounded by 40 immortal levels. What kind of terrifying scene was that? In the entire martial arts circle of the Dahan country, there was no one in the longevity realm. Fang Yuan was shocked. Even Su Li's expression changed subtly. What she had seen and heard in her previous life was too low. She had only come into contact with immortal level when she was following the legendary lady. However, she had no idea about the division of immortal level. It was not a good time to ask about it. That night, I ran for my life in panic, and I ran for several years. My injuries didn't get better, and instead, they were getting worse. Because of this, I couldn't exert 10% of my strength. This situation lasted for a long time until I met you, Suli. Although the star source of wood you have mastered is very little, it is more than enough to treat the people in the longevity realm. For the past half a year, you've personally treated my injuries. Coupled with the miraculous elixirs, the injuries on my body have long been healed, and my cultivation has also improved slightly. Suli raised her eyebrows slightly. The star source of wood was the starlight mentioned by Qi Xianqing. It was a power that could only be mastered by the people in the longevity realm. I'm afraid that when Tingyi never dreamed that there would be a warrior of the inborn realm who mastered the holy means of healing in the secular world. When Tingshan sneered, there are only 6 people in the first step of the longevity realm who chased me. With my current strength, it's easy to kill them. You have been staying in the Leanly building all the time. Even if you fight, you hide your identity. They shouldn't know it. Why do you hide in the spiritual realm? Hearing this, Suli's speculation gradually became clear, and she asked directly. When Tingshan shook his head and smiled bitterly, although our Wanjian sect specializes in swordsmanship, there are also practitioners who practice unorthodox methods. When Tingyi has a senior in the longevity realm who specializes in deduction, relying on this person's deduction skill, they can follow me like maggots in a tarsal bone. I can't get rid of them no matter how hard I try. So, after your injury was healed, that person sensed the danger and hid in the spiritual realm with others. Suli suddenly realized that everything was caused by the peeping sky skill. The sky-peering technique was a unique technique of the cultivators of the longevity realm who practiced the way of deduction. It could be used to predict good fortune and avoid disasters. It could also be used to track anything with the owner's breath. It had a wider range than the poisonous insect technique. For example, Fang Yuan's vital insect, the poisonous insect 1,000 miles tracking, could only cover a distance of 10,000 miles. But the tracking skill of the practitioners in the longevity realm could reach a distance of 100,000 miles or even 1,000,000 miles. The range would gradually expand with the growth of the practitioner's cultivation. Since you have reached the second step of cultivation and recovered, those people should know that their fate has long been doomed. Escaping into the spiritual realm is just deceiving themselves. Suli curled her lips slightly. She knew very well what the spiritual realm was. Even with the peeping sky skill, she couldn't find any mystery. The practitioner who was proficient in the peeping sky skill must have regarded the spiritual realm as the only way to survive, so he hid in it with others. But he didn't know that the people in the spiritual realm would not care about them at all. After this trip, the matter in the Wanjian sect will be finished. Uncle Shan, I'm afraid you need to go back to the spiritual circle, Suli said calmly. When Tingshan raised his eyebrows slightly and smiled, after I settle the chaos in the Wanjian sect, I will bring people back to help you. It won't take too long. With his cultivation, as long as he returned to the sect with the token, he could immediately grasp the general trend. At most, he could integrate the Wanjian sect within a month. Then I congratulate you in advance. Ho ho! Fang Yuan sat aside and watched them talking happily. He couldn't help but fall into silence. He found that he couldn't get a word in. He knew nothing about the so-called longevity realm, the peeping sky skill, and the spiritual realm. Compared with Suli, his knowledge was too far behind. For a time, a feeling of inferiority suddenly brewed in the bottom of his heart. This inferiority had existed for a long time, but it had been affecting him in a subtle way. At this moment, it was obvious that this inferiority had grown. However, even if he felt inferior, he would never retreat in front of Suli. He would have his own way to make up for all the gaps. After an hour, the carriage finally stopped in front of a dilapidated temple. Fang Yuan got off the carriage and looked around. He couldn't help but feel puzzled. This place was infinitely close to the city wall of Yunjing City. It was a rare, desolate place in Yunjing City. This temple, if he was right, it was a temple of the earth where no one worshipped for a long time. Was the spiritual realm here? Suli walked slowly out of the carriage and looked solemn. Although she said it casually on the carriage, she didn't dare to be careless. If Fang Yuan observed more carefully, he would find that every grass, every tree, and even the gravel here contained a unique charm. It was otherworldly, and did not belong to the world. It was like a small boat anchored at a dock that only had a tiny connection with the land. If this connection was broken, the existence here would immediately be like a small boat on a turbulent river, drifting away involuntarily. Suli stood silently for a moment and recalled the scene when she met the extraordinary woman here for the first time in the previous life. But just for a moment, she came to her senses. In Fang Yuan's puzzled eyes, she nodded to Wen Tingshan and said, "Let's start." When Tingshan's eyes flashed, it seemed that he confirmed something at this moment. Then he did not hesitate to kneel in front of the statue of the Earth God. His height was exactly 99 feet. He patted his chest and forced out a drop of purple-red blood. He shouted, "Blood of the true spirit! Open the true spirit!" Just at the moment when his voice fell, there was a ripple in the originally calm nothingness like throwing a stone into the lake. The purple-red blood trembled, and the ripple became bigger and bigger. Finally, everything in front of him was disturbed. The nothingness was torn apart like a piece of broken paper. Instead, there was another picture. Fang Yuan stared at the surroundings blankly. At this moment, he was not in a dilapidated temple, but a hall with extremely gorgeous and exquisite decoration. At this moment, there were only 3 of them in the hall. Such a magical scene completely subverted his view of the world. Su Li's reaction was average. The spiritual realm needed to be opened with the blood of the people of the spiritual circle. Although she was not a person of the spiritual circle, she had seen this scene countless times. When Tingshan saw Su Li's reaction and frowned slightly, he could not see whether Su Li was really calm or pretending. At this moment, a graceful voice came. Su Li and the other 2 looked at the same time. They saw a woman in cyan coming slowly. She gave a salute and said with a warm smile, "It turns out that you are the head of the Wanjian sect. Please forgive me for not going out to meet you." She seemed to be very respectful, but Fang Yuan still felt the indifference and coldness from her. It seemed that everything that happened in the world had nothing to do with them. They were more like bystanders than living in this world. "Fairy Qinghe, nice to meet you." When Tingshan returned a salute and said in a neither humble nor arrogant manner. He only had 2 impressions of the spiritual realm, mysterious and powerful. But he didn't dare to speak with contempt like Su Li. "I think we can't hide the purpose of our coming from Fairy Qinghe. Please don't interfere in the affairs of the Wanjian sect." Qinghe nodded with a smile and said, "Head, you must be joking. The spiritual realm never interferes in the affairs of the spiritual circle. It only records the rise and fall of the spiritual circle. The spiritual realm will not interfere in the affairs of the Wanjian sect. Please go ahead, head." Hearing this, when Tingshan's face darkened slightly, but he didn't dare to lose his temper. He could only take Su Li and Fang Yuan to look for the people of the Wanjian sect in the huge spiritual realm. But they didn't find anyone except Qinghe, not to mention that they recognized them. Chapter 273. Deacon Qinghe, what do you mean? After the group of people turned around and returned to the original hall, when Tingshan finally asked coldly, he had been to the spiritual realm before. In every country in the secular world and every big sect in the martial arts circle, there would be a spiritual realm stationed. In addition to the head of the realm, there were 6 deacons and many servants with lower status. But now, there was only 1 deacon in the spiritual realm of Dahan country, Qinghe, and there were no other servants. Was it normal? When Qinghe was questioned, the smile on her face slowly disappeared. Her originally warm tone also quickly became cold. "Pavilion Master 1, I don't understand what you're saying. If you want to deal with your family's matters, I've already asked you to do as you please. Could it be that you still expect me to provide you with some help?" When Tingshan looked serious and was about to refute, Su Li suddenly stood out and stopped him. "Uncle Shan, it's useless to say more. There is a tactical matrix here, and we haven't really entered the spiritual realm yet." Tactical matrix? Fang Yuan immediately became nervous. He subconsciously put Su Li behind him and looked around vigilantly. A trace of surprise flashed through Qinghe's eyes, but she didn't panic. She slightly raised the corners of her mouth and chuckled. "I didn't expect this little sister to be an expert." This tactical matrix is nothing in our spiritual realm, but not everyone can detect it. Su Li smiled slightly and ignored Qing He. She turned to Fang Yuan and said, "Do as I say, and I will teach you to break the tactical matrix." Fang Yuan was stunned and nodded with a little strange. If Su Li wanted to command him to break the tactical matrix, she could transmit the sound. Why did she say it clearly? Wasn't it a slap in the face of Deacon Qing He? Sure enough, Qing He saw that Su Li not only ignored her, but also wanted to break the tactical matrix. Her face immediately became gloomy, and her voice became sharp because of anger. What a boastful little girl. How dare you break the tactical matrix of the spiritual realm? I'd like to see what you can do. Su Li smiled slightly. Deacon Qing, you don't need to understand what I can do. But before I break the tactical matrix, please don't act rashly, so as to avoid some unpleasant misunderstandings. Misunderstandings? Qing He looked angry. You are just a silly little girl. You don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. How dare he threaten the deacon of spiritual realm? I will discipline you for Wen Tingshan. Before Su Li finished her words, Qing He had already attacked angrily. Su Li squinted her eyes slightly and didn't dodge. Bang! There was an explosion in the air, and even the surrounding scene rippled. Qing He widened her almond-shaped eyes and looked at Wen Tingshan in disbelief. She screamed, Wen Tingshan, you, how dare you attack me? This was the spiritual realm, the most mysterious and powerful force in this world. Whether it was the inborn realm or the longevity realm, there was no difference in front of this behemoth. The last person who offended the spiritual realm had already died without leaving any bones. Wen Tingshan's face was very ugly. Of course, he knew the result of fighting in the spiritual realm. But Su Li didn't dodge just now. It was obvious that she wanted him to fight. Noisy. Su Li frowned and looked indifferent. She continued to instruct, Uncle Shan, restrain her first. Wait until I break the tactical matrix. Wen Tingshan was also forthright. Anyway, he had already started. In for a penny, in for a pound. He directly grabbed Qing He's nape with one hand, making her unable to move. Wen Tingshan, you are crazy. Your juniors don't know the rules. Don't you know the rules of the spiritual realm? You're digging your own grave. No one can save you. Slap. A bright red palm print appeared on Qing He's face. It was burning. Su Li slowly withdrew her palm and still looked indifferent. She said, if you dare to say more, it will not be as simple as a slap. Shut up. Qing He's eyes were full of fear. She didn't expect that Wen Tingshan was so bold. With her cultivation of the inborn sixth hurdle, she was no match for Wen Tingshan. She couldn't even react. What's more, she didn't expect that such a 16 or 17-year-old girl could be so decisive and ruthless. She even dared to slap her. She could see that the girl was clearly a hothead. She didn't know why Wen Tingshan obeyed her orders. However, after being slapped, she completely calmed down. The hothead was afraid of the unreasonable, and the unreasonable was afraid of the desperate. In Qing He's eyes, Su Li was desperate. She chose to retreat temporarily. When the tactical matrix was broken, she would return to the spiritual realm and all the crises would be resolved. At that time, she would make Su Li beg for death. Qing He thought bitterly. Su Li noticed her gaze, but didn't respond at all. She continued to command Fang Yuan to break the tactical matrix. Su Li, are you sure? Wen Tingshan couldn't help but transmit the sound. Although Su Li had always shown extraordinary maturity and wisdom, he couldn't think of a way to break the spiritual realm rashly. Uncle Shan, don't be impatient. After breaking the tactical matrix, you will know the result. Seeing Su Li's confident look, Wen Tingshan was a little relieved. He chose to believe her after getting along with her during this time. However, this sentence was a one-sided statement to cover up panic in Qing He's ears. A vicious smile flashed across her face. She was already thinking about how to deal with Su Li after getting out of trouble. 31 steps to the right, draw your sword. 9 steps forward, shatter the stone pillar. Return to the original position. Su Li's voice constantly came to his ears. Fang Yuan's expression remained unchanged, and he executed meticulously. In his opinion, the difficulty of breaking this tactical matrix was even less than that of the natural tactical matrix they encountered in the mountains of Dawang village. In less than 10 minutes, the surrounding scene made a sound like porcelain breaking. With the last sword of Feng Yuan, the tactical matrix was broken. After the fluctuation of the tactical matrix passed, the four figures appeared in front of an exquisitely decorated hexagonal attic. The plaque, Spiritual Realm, on the attic was shining. The sudden appearance of the three people naturally attracted the attention of people in the attic. When someone saw Qing He being controlled by Wen Tingshan with a pale face, everyone's face suddenly changed. Even the attic itself was faintly shaking. It had not happened for many years that outsiders caught the executive of the spiritual realm. Go and inform the head of the spiritual realm. They have bad intentions. Isn't that the next head of the Wanjian sect? Why does he suddenly attack Lady Qing He? Something big is going to happen today. When Tingshan looked at the chaos of the spiritual realm because of their appearance calmly, but he couldn't help but frown slightly. Qing He saw this scene and finally laughed out loud. When Tingshan, if you still have a shred of reason left in you, let go of me now and push all the blame onto this girl. Perhaps if I'm in a good mood, I might even let you live. Otherwise, all of you will die. When Tingshan's face was gloomy and his eyes changed, but his hands were always clenched tightly without any relaxation. Qing He didn't understand the relationship between him and Su Li at all. He owed Su Li his life and promised to work for her for 10 years. Even if it was a dangerous situation, he would not choose to give up Su Li and escape alone. Moreover, he was not completely without confidence in Su Li. As for Feng Yuan, who stood beside Su Li, he was always expressionless. No matter what happened, he would completely stand on Su Li's side and would not waver. Not long after, the other 5 executives stationed here all arrived and stood in a line to confront Su Li and the other 3. Soon after, a middle-aged man in a gray robe with a plain face stepped out of the attic. He slightly cupped his hands to Wen Tingshan and said in a neither humble nor arrogant manner, "Head one, I've heard a lot about you. You are also a giant in the spiritual circle. How did our Deacon Qing offend you? Why did you come to the spiritual realm for confrontation?" Seeing the middle-aged man's gentle attitude, Wen Tingshan frowned a little and hesitated. "Your Excellency, are you?" The middle-aged man seemed to understand and nodded with a smile. "I forgot that I am Chu Xiao, the head of the spiritual realm of Dahan country." Head Chu. Before Wen Tingshan spoke, Su Li stepped out and said with a faint smile, "This?" Chu Xiao frowned slightly and felt uncomfortable. He saw that Su Li was only about 16 years old. She didn't know the etiquette. The discipline of the Wanjian sect was too loose. Su Li smiled calmly and didn't give the middle-aged man a chance to speak. "It doesn't matter who I am. The important thing is that, Head Chu, you are incompetent and let the spiritual realm produce such an unruly executive. What should you do?" "What?" Chu Zhao's expression turned cold. He looked at the pitiful Qing He with a questioning look in his eyes. When Qing He met his gaze, she panicked and immediately cried out, "Building Master, save me! I didn't overstep the rules. This girl didn't know the rules at all. She not only let Wen Tingshan catch me but also slapped me. She didn't take the spiritual realm seriously at all." As soon as the words came out, the other 5 executives were immediately furious and spoke one after another. "Head, you can't be careless. Otherwise, you will lose the face of the spiritual realm. How dare you offend the spiritual realm at such a young age? How did your elders teach you? I think it's better to catch Wen Tingshan and others together and deal with them severely. Even if the Wanjian sect holds us responsible, we have something to say." "Be quiet." Chu Zhao's voice was not loud, but it overshadowed everyone. The scene immediately became silent. As the head of the spiritual realm, his ability naturally surpassed all the executives. In the face of Qing He's cry for help, he thought of another unusual detail at the moment. It seemed that this girl was not Wen Tingshan's elder, but Wen Tingshan followed her orders. "And, little girl, you mentioned the rules of the spiritual realm." With a faint smile on his face, Chu Xiao fixed his eyes on Su Li's beautiful face. "The rules of the spiritual realm are never spread out. Do you really know what rules we follow?" Hearing this, Su Li couldn't help but chuckle. Her lips moved slightly, and her voice was transmitted to the latter's ears. Chapter 274. Come on, take Qinghe away. Chu Zhao's expression was no longer gentle, and his decision was even more shocking. The other 5 deacons widened their eyes and felt cold all over. They couldn't help but look at Su Li again. What on earth did the woman say to the head? She could make the head punish Qinghe in public regardless of the face of the spiritual realm. Qinghe's face was pale, and she was completely panicked. She couldn't stop struggling and screaming, "Lord, what did I do wrong? I have served the spiritual realm for 32 years. Even if I don't have any credit, I have worked hard. Could it be that my years of conscientious service are nothing more than a few words of a silly girl? My lord, you've disappointed this concubine too much." The touching words and Qinghe's innocent and unwilling look made everyone in the spiritual realm feel a little strange. Today's decision of the head was too unfair. Seeing this, Chu Xiao snorted and said clearly, "Bai Ju, find out the relationship between her and Wen Tingyi of the Wanjian sect. If she really violates the rules of the spiritual realm, she will be expelled from the spiritual realm." What? Qinghe colluded with outsiders? The old man with gray hair turned pale with fright when he heard this. He was Bai Ju who Chu Xiao had mentioned, and he was also the number 1 deacon among the 6 deacons. The doubts in the eyes of the other 4 deacons faded away. They were all surprised and doubtful. Chu Xiao dared to say it clearly, so he must have some confidence. When Qinghe heard this, she knew clearly what would happen to her. She trembled all over and collapsed on the ground like a puddle of mud. She took risks for temporary interests and thought that she would never be discovered. Now Chu Xiao was suspicious, and she couldn't stand the investigation at all. Chu Xiao saw Qinghe's reaction, and the last hesitation in his eyes disappeared. He said with an ugly face, "I wanted to save you some face. Since you don't want it, don't blame me for being ruthless and taking her away." Bai Ju immediately took the order and walked to Wen Tingshan. When Tingshan glanced at Su Li and saw her nod, then he let go of his hand and let Bai Ju take her into the spiritual realm. A conflict disappeared. After a while, Su Li and the other 2 were invited to the room. When Tingshan looked around and knew that the standard of this guest room was not simple, he became more and more curious about what Su Li said to Chu Xiao. He didn't think it was only because of Qinghe that Chu Zhao's attitude changed so much. When Tingshan didn't have time to think about it, Chu Xiao came over with a smile. He cupped his hands and said, "Miss, this is indeed the problem of the spiritual realm. As an apology, I will capture the people from the 10,000 Swords Pavilion and hand them over to Pavilion Master 1. In addition, the spiritual realm will also give you other compensation, which can be regarded as a comfort for you." How long has it been? Master Chu has already found out the truth? When Tingshan was surprised. It was only less than 10 minutes. Even if he wanted to make Qinghe confess, it would not be so easy. Although when Tingshan interrupted, Chu Lu didn't show any anger on her face. She explained with a smile, "Don't be surprised, Pavilion Master 1. The spiritual realm records the rise and fall of the spiritual circle and even this world. The intelligence system is extremely thorough. Now, except for the mistake of Deacon Qinghe, it is not because of the problem of intelligence, but because no one checked it. Now that Deacon Qinghe is pointed out by this miss, it is easy for the spiritual realm to check it." When Tingshan nodded slightly and understood, but he was shocked in his heart. In this way, nothing in the world could be hidden from the eyes and ears of the spiritual realm. If the spiritual realm had been ambitious and never participated in the disputes of the outside world, the overlord of the spiritual circle would not have been the turn of those forces. It seems that Pavilion Master 1 is satisfied with my handling. In this case, Chu Xiao turned his eyes to Su Li and changed the topic. "Miss, can I have a word with you?" Su Li's eyes flashed and she nodded. "That's what I mean. Uncle Shan, Feng Yuan, I will be back soon. You wait here for a moment." "Miss, don't worry. During this time, the spiritual realm will entertain you well," Chu Xiao said considerately, and there seemed to be some eagerness in his words. Although when Tingshan and Feng Yuan had a lot of doubts in their hearts, they also knew that it was not the time to ask. so they immediately nodded and agreed. A moment later, on the top floor of the spiritual realm, Su Li calmly followed Chu Xiao in. If Feng Yuan was qualified to come here, he would find that the layout here was similar to that of the attic on the top floor of the Linli building. The only difference was that the cost of the furniture here was more than 10 million times more expensive than that of the attic of the Linli building. When they met alone, Chu Xiao finally showed his true feelings. He didn't look at Su Li as an elder looked at a junior, but as an equal. May I ask which branch of the spiritual realm you are? Why did you leave your post and come to our Dahan country as a guest? After a moment of silence, Chu Xiao probed cautiously. Just now, Su Li didn't say much in sound transmission, just 2 words. Jing Exine. Only people above the level of the head of the spiritual realm were qualified to know this name. Su Li smiled as if she returned to her own home. She walked to the table and sat down calmly. Head Chu, you don't need to test me. I'm not a head of any spiritual realm, let alone a member of the spiritual realm. Chu Zhao's expression changed immediately. How could the name of the great master be leaked? Was there a traitor among the heads of the spiritual realm? But at this moment, Su Li spoke again. Head Chu, you don't need to guess blindly. I'm not an enemy of the spiritual realm. I just had a relationship with that person a long time ago. If it's convenient, please transmit the sound in silence to her and tell her that an old friend invited me. I think she should understand. Chu Xiao was shocked. An old friend? The great master was so ancient and had lived for so many years. But today, a 16-year-old girl said that she was an old friend of the great master? He immediately thought of some legendary existences. It was said that even if those existences died, they could escape the restraint of the natural law and get a glimpse of the mystery of heaven and reincarnate with memory. Was it possible that the person standing in front of him was a reincarnated supreme master? Thinking of this, Chu Zhao's heart beat like a drum and his expression became extremely respectful. He bent down and whispered, "What you said, I dare not disobey. But may I have the honor to know your name, so that I can have proof when I report?" Su Li, Su as in Gusu and Li as in Linli. Su Li responded a little weirdly. She just suspected that Jing Exine knew her previous life and present life, but she didn't know how many bizarre things Chu Xiao had imagined. Jing Exine. It was a strange name. It was the name that she told herself when she followed that amazing woman in her previous life. Later, she left Jing Exine and traveled in the martial world. She didn't know how important this name was until she got the chance to do so. The spiritual realm was a terrifying force beyond the mortal world, and Jing Exine was its master, people called Great Lord of True Spirit. In the previous life, she was in a miserable situation. When she met Jing Exine, she had already fallen into the evil circle and was hated by everyone. The so-called righteous people all wanted to kill her. At that time, Jing Exine came forward to protect her and allowed her to practice with her for 3 years. Those 3 years greatly enriched her knowledge. Without those 3 years, she was afraid that she would have died early. However, that encounter also left her with many questions. She couldn't figure out why an ordinary girl like her, who had only stepped onto the path of cultivation by chance, had even gone astray. She didn't have the slightest bit of difference. So, why exactly was she able to enter the eyes of the Holy Lord? Moreover, the evaluation of the Great Lord of True Spirit in the spiritual circle was positive, while she, an evil witch, was even more unreasonable. After her rebirth, she had always suppressed all kinds of doubts in her heart, until the so-called broken ring appeared. All kinds of incredible things made her have a moment of enlightenment. Perhaps Jing Exine had already seen her future. Perhaps there were some things she wanted to know from Jing Exine. On the one hand, she came to the spiritual realm to denounce the Wanjian sect, but more for the purpose in her heart. The matter of Wentingyi was just solved by the way. It was one of the iron rules of the spiritual realm not to have cause and effect with the spiritual circle. If Qinghe dared to use her power for personal gain, she would end up worse than she imagined. She vaguely remembered that in the previous life, there was a greedy head of a branch of the spiritual realm and became a local tyrant. Later, he was beheaded by Jing Exine in public. His head was hung in the zone pavilion of the spiritual realm for 7 days and 7 nights, which made people tremble. However, many years after that incident, she changed many futures in this life. After Qinghe was caught, it was still unknown whether there would be such a local tyrant again. After thinking for a moment, the chaotic thoughts faded in her mind. Suli came back to herself and saw Chu Xiao standing aside and waiting quietly. She couldn't help but feel a little ridiculous, but she didn't explain anything and walked out of the attic. Chu Xiao immediately followed her and whispered in Suli's ear, "Senior, you have thought for an hour. I have handed the traitor of the Wanjian sect to one Tingshan to deal with, if you need." Before Chu Xiao finished his words, Suli's eyes became cold and she asserted, "The spiritual realm is not contaminated with cause and effect. If you dare to violate it, no one can save you." Chu Xiao suddenly woke up and cold sweat immediately flowed down. "Senior, you are right. I am confused." Suli shook her head and was about to leave. Before she left, she didn't forget to say, "If you have no other important things, it is better to let your great lord know about my affairs as soon as possible. I will go to the zone pavilion today." Chu Xiao repeatedly promised and sent Suli to the door. Then he left in a hurry, which made other deacons' eyes wide open. They secretly guessed what noble identity Suli had and even wanted to explore it. However, this idea was interrupted by Chu Xiao's warning before it was implemented. No one dared to think about it anymore. When the three returned to the Linli building, it had been half a day. When Tingshan was full of bloody smell. Obviously, he had just killed someone. He didn't talk too much with Suli and left directly. He needed to go back to the Wanjian sect to deal with the funeral affairs. With the deterrence of the spiritual realm and the token of the head, it was easy for him to succeed as the head. Chapter 275. Because of the marriage, Suli failed to deal with the intelligence gathered from all directions for 2 days. She stayed in the attic until the evening. Then she left without stopping. Chu Qingning saw this scene and couldn't help but sigh. Suli didn't seem to change much before and after the marriage, but he couldn't tell what was different. "Why are you sighing?" A figure suddenly appeared behind him. Chu Qingning was so scared that he almost jumped up. When he saw Luo Yiqin, he immediately said angrily, "Can't you make a sound when you walk? You will be scared to death." "I haven't seen a warrior of the inborn realm be scared to death. You might as well broaden my horizons." Luo Yiqin smiled. In the Linli building, Chu Qingning had the best relationship with him except Mei Ruhan. Otherwise, he wouldn't even tell a cold joke according to his temper. "Well, your temper. I don't want to talk to you. Fang Yuan wants to talk to us. He is in the addendum now. Let's go." Chu Qingning suddenly understood. No wonder Luo Yiqin, who was obsessed with martial arts, had time to talk to him. It turned out that he wanted to talk to him. But Suli just left. What could Fang Yuan have to talk to him? With doubts, Chu Qingning followed Luo Yiqin to the underground addendum. All the acquaintances were sitting at the table. Compared with the secret discussion in the morning, only when Tingshan and Suli were absent. Everyone is here. Seeing Chu Qingning and Fang Yuan arrive, Yin Shuedong's eyes flashed. "Brother Fang, what do you want to talk to us about?" Fang Yuan glanced at everyone and said softly, "I just have a little doubt and need to verify. How many Wudao stones did Suli give you?" As he said, he spread out his palm, and there were 9 Wudao stones on it. Hiss! Chu Qingning took a breath and screamed, "I thought Suli had given me enough Wudao stones. You have 1 more than me. I have 8. Fang Mu met his eldest brother's eyes and immediately said obediently, "I also have 8. A light flashed in Luo Yiqin's eyes. He seemed to notice the strangeness and said softly, 9. Yin Shuedong frowned, "I also have 8. Suli asked me to practice hard and break through the inborn realm as soon as possible." Mei Ruhan and Fang Ling looked at each other and took out 4 martial arts stones each. Their cultivation time was too short, so no matter how many martial arts stones they had, it was useless. Seeing the number of Wudao stones in everyone's hands, Fang Yuan's expression sank completely. Luo Yiqin thought for a while and murmured, "Fang Yuan, I remember you said that Suli disguised as Mr. Li to meet Ling Li and asked for 50 Wudao stones. Now, the martial arts stones are all here." In Shuedong's eyes flashed with shock and puzzlement. Su Li didn't even keep one for herself. Doesn't she need to practice? In an instant, a heavy feeling lingered in everyone's heart. Before Su Li was about to die, she made arrangements for her funeral. Now she inexplicably survived and did such a strange thing. People couldn't help but associate the two with each other. Shua. Fong Yuan was silent. He grabbed the Wudao stones and stood up suddenly. Then he turned around and left. Chu Qingning was shocked. Fong Yuan, don't be impulsive. What are you going to do? Fong Yuan stopped and looked back at Chu Qingning coldly. Chu Qingning felt cold all over. Then he said softly, practice. His strength couldn't help her. Only by mastering enough cultivation as soon as possible could he be qualified to reverse the situation. He didn't want to experience the powerlessness of the last time again. Cultivation couldn't be done behind closed doors. He needed to improve his cultivation in a more crazy way. Hey, wait for me. Chu Qingning was worried and hurriedly chased after him. After a long time, he came back alone and was a little lost. Qingning. In Shuedong greeted him with concern. Chu Qingning smiled reluctantly and said, I'm fine. Fong Yuan said that he went to Uncle Shan's place to practice and strive to break through his cultivation as soon as possible. I just think whether we should do something. We can't. Let Su Li handle everything alone, can we? In Shuedong was stunned, and then a touch of relief appeared in her eyes. They were all young, less than 20 years old. In ordinary families, they were still ignorant children. Chu Qingning was carefree and cynical. If there was no accident, the man in her eyes might need a few years or even a decade to understand what responsibility was. However, under the stimulation of Su Li and Fong Yuan, he was maturing at a very fast speed. Qingning, do what you want to do. I will support you wholeheartedly and won't hold you back. In Shuedong's gentle voice came. Chu Qingning was stunned and immediately grinned. Wait for me to call Luo Yichen. I can't let you stay in the room alone. In Shuedong blushed slightly and couldn't help but spit. Don't be serious. Hurry up. Now there is nothing to do in the Linli building, and Uncle Shan will bring people back soon. You can leave at ease. Okay. Chu Qingning solemnly responded, and his eyes flashed with firmness. Su Li kept saying that it was a fair deal. But now Su Li's unilateral contribution couldn't be completely covered by a deal. No matter how much time she had left, they would try their best to break through their own realms and do their best to help her. Only in this way could they have no regrets in their hearts. In the east courtyard of the Ling mansion, Ling Qinglan came back from the Supreme Judiciary and was discussing recent important things with Ling Li. His sister Yi Shui came back, which made him happy recently. Even if the cases of the Supreme Judiciary and the Tianya House were piled up and he was extremely tired every day, he was not unhappy at all. Recently, the Nanjiang country and the Lianshi cult fought fiercely, and even the border suffered. The army is ready to take action. I'm afraid that the second brother will go to battle again. Ling Qinglan analyzed. Ling Li frowned slightly. The war of the Nanjiang country had subsided. However, at the auction at the end of the year, he plotted to kill Wei Yuran and successfully framed the Lianshi cult. But it also caused the second brother to return to the battlefield. The situation on the battlefield changed rapidly. Over the years, he couldn't arrive in time every time to help Ling Ping win the battle. Now the relationship between him and the royal family was getting more and more tense. In this case, how could he not worry about Ling Ping going to battle again? But at this moment, the mechanism on the table suddenly turned on its own, and a hole appeared on the ground. Su Li's voice slowly emerged from the ground. Ling Qinglan was slightly shocked, and then he was relieved. Whether Su Li wanted to marry Ling Li or not, she was indeed the wife of the hierarch of the Yinma cult. Of course, she was qualified to use the tunnel of the headquarters. Seeing that Ling Qinglan was also there, Su Li's eyes flickered slightly. I'll leave now, no? Ling Li interrupted. He didn't ask where Su Li went today. He stared at Su Li for a moment and said slowly, if I am in the study and you are in the wing room, how will my mother and others think of it? Ling Qinglan, who was watching, couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. He sighed a little. Sure enough, Su Li was forced to marry into the Ling family. She and Ling Li were so close at the beginning. Whoever thought that their relationship was so estranged? Since Hierarch Ling is not afraid that the information of your cult will be leaked, Su Li said coldly. She walked to the rattan chair next to the bookshelf and sat down. She picked up an ancient book and read it quietly. She knew that it was nothing more than an excuse for Lingli to let her stay with him. But she couldn't refute this excuse. After all, no one knew whether Chiu Ming was observing her. Lingli saw that Su Li promised to stay, but she even sat with her back to him. Helplessness flashed in his eyes. This kind of marriage also made Su Li hate him completely. Her words and deeds made him feel very uncomfortable. But even so, he still wanted Su Li to stay with him. It was painful and happy. Ling Qinglan pursed his lips and continued to talk about other information. The relationship between Su Li and Lingli was complicated. He didn't want to get involved. It was getting dark. Ling Mo came forward to light the oil lamp and then continued to guard the door. Occasionally, he curiously stretched out his head to see what Su Li was reading. Su Li didn't mean to hide and let Ling Mo peep. Ling Mo, you don't need to guard here. Go to practice first. Suddenly, Ling Li's voice came. Ling Mo was slightly stunned. It was almost time for dinner, and Ling Qinglan was not here. Madam might come to check in person. Was the master confused to let him practice at this time? There was a clear sound of turning pages. Ling Mo suddenly understood. Then he felt strange and didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Just because Su Li asked him to peep at the books, the master was jealous? How could he be jealous? The relationship between him and Su Li was obviously terrible. In this case, the master could be so stingy. It was rare in the world. Ling Mo. When Ling Li spoke again with a black face, Su Li suddenly closed the book and stood up. She picked up the teapot on the stove and made a cup of tea. Then she carefully brought it to Ling Li, who was full of astonishment. Her face became as gentle as water in an instant. A touch of bright red appeared on her face. She whispered, "Honey, please have some tea." Then, she helped Su Li to clean up the files. In the blink of an eye, the files on the table were cleared. Ling Li was immediately stunned and couldn't understand. At the moment when Su Li finished cleaning up, Ling Mo's expression changed slightly. He immediately opened the door and went out. Then Ling Li heard the voice, "Madam." Chiu Ming came. He should have thought of it. But he was shocked by Su Li's action and was distracted for a while. However, because of the tactical matrix of the East Courtyard, ordinary inborn spiritual awareness could not penetrate it. Even Ling Mo, who specially spent a lot of effort to practice the psychic awareness, just noticed the arrival of Chiu Ming. How did Su Li know the whereabouts of his mother in advance? Was it possible that Su Li's psychic awareness was stronger than Ling Mo's? Just when Ling Li was in doubt, Chiu Ming had already pushed the door open and came in. She saw Su Li standing quietly beside her son and glimpsed the fragrant tea. Her smile on her face immediately became wider. Originally, she was worried that Su Li pretended to be virtuous in front of her. After all, with her son's ability, if he was really arrogant in front of her daughter-in-law, it would be hard for Su Li not to dislike him. Fortunately, all her worries were superfluous. Su Li was much more sensible than she thought. Chapter 276. At dinner, Ms. Gu might be tired, so she didn't show up. After Ling Li had dinner with Su Li and his mother, Chiu Ming handed an invitation to Ling Li and said carefully, "Son, I know that you have turned over a new leaf for Li and no longer go out to make trouble, but it's not a good idea to stay at home. I have an invitation here. Take Li to the banquet. Don't let her be wronged. Do you understand?" Ling Li nodded helplessly and listened to his mother's advice casually. He opened the invitation and glanced at it. Suddenly, he was shocked. Chiu Ming noticed that something was wrong and couldn't help but ask, "Son, what's wrong with the invitation?" "No, no." Ling Li responded quickly and said with a smile, "But mother, you know that I seem to have a relationship with the host of the banquet." Then, he raised the invitation in his hand. Su Li vaguely saw the words Dongfang Yuyin flashed on it, and an unknown meaning flashed on her face. Hearing that, Chiu Ming's face immediately darkened. She glanced at Su Li quietly and saw that Su Li was confused. She secretly breathed a sigh of relief and scolded in a low voice, "You have a family now. You can't do the ridiculous thing in the past again. Fortunately, the fourth princess is also married. She won't care about the past. You can take Suli to the banquet. Don't care about the past? Lingli smiled bitterly. He didn't believe it, but he didn't refuse. He agreed with a bitter face. Seeing that her son nodded, Xiaoming left with satisfaction. She thought that she could finally hold her head high in front of those gossipy women. As for how to deal with the banquet tomorrow, it would be solved by the juniors themselves. The bowls and chopsticks were cleaned up by the servants. Lingli took the invitation and returned to the east courtyard with Suli. He looked calm and a hint of wisdom flashed in his eyes. The host of the banquet was the fourth princess, Dongfang Yuyin. Suli gently picked up the invitation that Lingli put on the table. She opened it and said in a quiet and sweet voice, "The fourth princess invites all the couples in Yunjing City who have been married for less than a year. Although the reason is sufficient, the time is coincidentally the second day after our marriage." Speaking of this, Suli looked slightly cold and smiled in a low voice. Dongfang Xiao is really suspicious. Lingli nodded in agreement. The so-called purpose of the banquet was not as simple as his mother thought. It was obviously a test arranged by Dongfang Xiao. "By the way, what happened between you and Dongfang Yuyin?" After a moment of silence in the room, Suli suddenly asked. Lingli held his breath, and a trace of embarrassment flashed on his face. He didn't say a word for a long time. Seeing this, Suli's expression didn't change at all. She just shook her head and sneered, "Well, I'm not interested in your romantic history. Don't make any mistakes tomorrow." Then, Suli stepped out of the study and quickly disappeared into the night. Lingli stood at the table and looked out of the window at the dark night. After a long time, he took a breath and came back to himself. His eyes were clear again. Turning the wheelchair to the wing room, Lingli didn't see Suli. He couldn't help but wonder where Suli could go at this time. At this time, Mammy Li passed by the room with a bucket of water. Seeing that the master seemed to be looking for something, she couldn't help but say, "Master, are you looking for Madam? Madam is taking a bath in the back hall. If you go there now, you can catch up." "Catch up with what?" Lingli was stunned. Seeing Mammy Li's meaningful smile, his face immediately turned red, and his face was so hot that it could almost make a sesame seed cake. "Haha." Mammy Li couldn't help laughing. She quickly left with the bucket of water. The master was still too thin-skinned. It was not a big deal. Naturally, Lingli couldn't go to the back hall. Otherwise, he could foresee that he would probably be kicked out by Suli. It was not easy to maintain the current situation. He didn't want his image in Suli's heart to continue to deteriorate. After going to the bathhouse on the other side to take a rough bath, Lingli returned to the wing room and waited for a long time. Suli came back slowly. Before he saw her, a wisp of fragrance had floated into his nose. The delicate and beautiful face showed a perfect outline in the moonlight. The white gauze dress was blown by the night wind, and the exposed white skin was still steaming. She was like a fairy from the ninth heaven, unstained by the secular world. It seemed that she would float away in the next moment. Such a smart and beautiful woman was his wife now. Lingli thought of this, and he was fascinated for a moment. Suddenly, whoosh! A white shadow flashed in front of Ling Li's eyes very quickly and closed the wooden doors on both sides of the inner room. Then he heard a clear sound of the door bolt. Ling Li woke up and was instantly dumbfounded. Suli locked the door? "Darling, no one will make trouble in the bridal chamber today. In the future, you can only have a rest in the guest room. Don't worry, it won't be too hard for a long time. When the crisis is over, you can divorce me." Suli's voice came from the door. It seemed that she felt it was not very moral. Her tone was very soft, but Lingli felt that there was a hint of schadenfreude in her voice. What a devil! Lingli was angry. He was also a man, and facing his beloved woman, how could he have no reaction? But it was the most painful thing that he could see her but couldn't touch her. Nothing happened all night, and it was dawn in the blink of an eye. Squeak! The door made a light sound, and Suli came out of the inner room. She was dressed neatly, with a ruddy face and full of spirit. It seemed that she had a good sleep. The sound woke up Lingli, who tossed and turned for nearly a night and slept in his clothes in the morning. He fell off the rattan chair carelessly. Hiss! Lingli took a light breath and looked at Su Li's faint smile. His face darkened. He had reached the inborn realm, and he wouldn't feel tired even if he didn't sleep for 3 days and 3 nights. But last night was too torturous, and the energy consumed was much more than that of 3 days and 3 nights. So, he felt a little tired now. At this moment, Mammy Lee pushed the door and came in with things to wash. Seeing that they had gotten up early in the morning and seemed to be quarreling, she didn't say much. She just glanced at the messy bed with a slight meaning, and then turned to go out with a snicker. The maids in the wing room of the east courtyard were all arranged by Chiu Ming. In order not to expose Ling Li's action, Su Li had ordered servants to wash in the morning, and Mammy Lee, who was an insider, was responsible for it. It saved a lot of trouble. Washing and tying up their hair ended in an awkward and harmonious weird atmosphere. After breakfast, they got on the carriage and left. Apparently, they only took Ling Imo and Yuni as guards. After the carriage with the mark of the Ling family passed through 2 streets, it drove into the controlled street that only the royal family was qualified to walk. It was unimpeded all the way, and finally stopped in a large royal courtyard. "Master, madam, here we are," Ling Imo, who was driving the carriage, said. At the same time, Yuni opened the curtain, set up the skateboard, and waited for Su Li and Ling Li to get off the horse. Su Li pushed the wheelchair out of the carriage. Looking ahead, there was a high wall with red walls and green tiles. On the tall and spacious gate, there was a plaque with 3 flamboyant characters hanging. Lingfeng House. She looked relaxed, but there was a deep caution in her eyes. This was an important place of the royal family, and it was only 1 step away from the imperial palace. If her and Ling Li's real identity was exposed here, it would be hard to escape. In the early years, this was the residence of Dongfang Yuan. Later, Dongfang Yuan married a husband, and this place was expanded again. So, it has today's scale. The area of the courtyard for the banquet can accommodate hundreds of people at the same time. Ling Li transmitted the sound in silence in a low tone. Here, they couldn't allow any carelessness. Every step must be carefully analyzed. This trip could be regarded as dangerous. No one could predict whether Dongfang Xiao would suddenly attack them. Chiu Ming, who was simple, might not think of this. Otherwise, she would definitely not let Ling Li and Ling Li take risks even if she fell out with those noble madams. At this moment, a group of maids and eunuchs came out of the gatehouse. They saluted to Ling Li and Su Li and said, "Greetings, Your Highness. Greetings, Your Highness." Ling Li was a little proud and shouted, "Madam, what are you looking at? It's almost time. Let's go in." Su Li's eyes flashed slightly. It seemed that she just came to herself. She blushed and said embarrassedly, "It's the first time for me to come to the royal courtyard. I make a fool of myself." "Hey, even if you make a fool of yourself, you are still very beautiful. It's really, beauty is delicious." Su Li blushed again. She quickly pushed Ling Li into the courtyard. The conversation was heard by the maids. Although they didn't dare to show anything on their faces, they secretly despised them. Even though they were poor in literature, they still knew beauty is delicious. How could the 3rd child of the Ling family mispronounce it? The most talented girl in Yunjing City should marry such a vulgar playboy. It was a reckless waste. They didn't know what the emperor was thinking. The design of the Lingfeng house was obviously done by a master. The scenery of every step could be called a picture. It was just beautiful but not arrogant. Su Li could see that the princess, whom she had never met, was not scheming and not difficult to deal with. After pushing the wheelchair through the gravel path, the 2 of them suddenly saw the light. They also heard the lively conversation. At this moment, there were no less than 30 pairs of beauties and talents in the courtyard. Many people also noticed the arrival of Su Li and Ling Li. Seeing the couple, famous in the capital, in front of them, everyone had different reactions. But they all whispered at the same time, "She is Princess Li. She deserves her reputation. Her eyebrows, eyes, and red lips are just perfect. Her skin is as clear as cream. She deserves the title of the first beauty in Yunjing City. You can say this to me. Don't tell your wife. Otherwise, you can't blame me for the trouble in the backyard." Ha ha ha. It's a pity that such a fairy-like woman should marry a playboy. Playboy? He is clearly a good-for-nothing. It's flattering to call him a playboy. Ling Li's eyebrows twitched. With his hearing, he naturally heard every word, but he had to pretend that he didn't hear it. It was really aggrieved. Chapter 277. Suli. The voice was very familiar. Suli turned her head when she heard the voice. When she saw the beautiful figure who was walking in a hurry, she was surprised. Gongmin, you are here too? When she came to the Qinghe province at the beginning of the year, thanks to the help of Gong Xiangjuan, her plan could be carried out. After Wu Yun died, Gongmin and Gong Xiangjuan were no longer in danger. After she came to Yunjing, she didn't pay attention to the Gong family. Unexpectedly, Gong Min had already come to Yunjing and got married. While thinking, Gong Min had walked to Su Li. She couldn't help the excitement of seeing an old friend in her eyes. If Su Li didn't stand up for her, she and her grandma would suffer. She couldn't repay her kindness in this life. Su Li, after my grandma and I came to Yunjing, the Wu family suddenly retreated. My grandma had high prestige and regained control of the Gong family. Unfortunately, I was not qualified to find you because of the level of my family. After my grandma knew your identity, she forbade me to contact you until today. Gong Min spoke quickly, and her words naturally revealed her sincerity. It's great to see you. Su Li smiled slightly. She could see that Gong Min was sincere and could understand Gong Xiangjuan. The Gong family had many things to do and couldn't withstand the wind and waves. What's more, the whirlpool she fell into now was not as simple as the wind and waves. It's a pleasure to see my old friend in a strange place. At this moment, a handsome young man came and stood beside Gong Min. He looked at Su Li with amazement and envy, but there was no covetousness in his eyes. Min, I didn't expect that you know Princess Li. Why don't you introduce her to me? As soon as these words came out, Gong Min was slightly startled, but the face of someone sitting in the wheelchair had already completely darkened. Princess Li? Not Madame Ling? Gong Min looked a little embarrassed and said reluctantly, Childling, Li, let me introduce you. This is my husband. The young man nodded slightly and said, I'm Zhao Xiyuan. Nice to meet Princess Li and Childling. I have heard that Princess Li is talented and beautiful. Although I don't know how talented you are, I am really impressed by your appearance. The son of the Zhao family? Ling Li's eyes were burning with anger. He said in a low voice, You are just the son of the assistant minister. Who gave you the courage to be on an equal footing with me? Zhao Xiyuan's expression changed slightly, but he didn't show any fear. Instead, he said coldly, Min, take Su Li to the table first. I want to have a good chat with Third Master Ling. Gong Min's eyes were full of worry. She glanced at Su Li and finally sighed. Su Li, I'm really sorry. It's fine. Su Li shook her head slightly and took a deep look at Ling Li. Then she followed Gong Min and left. There were only 2 people left in the field. Zhao Xiyuan put one hand behind his back and straightened up. The anger in his eyes was even more intense than that of Ling Li. He said, Ling Li, a wise man doesn't speak in riddles. It has been spread in the circle that you asked the emperor to grant a marriage and married Princess Li by extraordinary means. You are not a man. Ling Li raised his eyebrows and leaned on the wheelchair. He stared at Zhao Xiyuan's clear eyes. After a while, he suddenly grinned and said, That's what I did. You are just the son of an assistant minister. What can you do? You. Zhao Xiyuan didn't expect that Ling Li admitted it directly and was so arrogant. He couldn't help but be very angry. He scolded with a livid face, Ling Li, you are really a bastard. It's not up to you to decide whether I am a bastard or not. Ling Li picked his ears and said, You should be glad that you married a good wife. Otherwise, the Zhao family, ha. The threat in Ling Li's words couldn't be more obvious. Even if Zhao Xiyuan was magnanimous and full of justice and wanted to avenge Su Li, he had to be scrupulous at this moment. In grievance, he suddenly thought of something. His eyes brightened and he sneered, Third Master Ling is really as lawless as the rumor says. Today I finally see it. However, I can't do anything to you. but it doesn't mean that everyone can. Let's wait and see. The conversation was deliberately led by Lingli to end on a bad note. After Zhao Shiyuan left, there was no one around Lingli except Ling Imo. He looked around and didn't see Su Li. A touch of contemplation flashed in his eyes. Zhao Shiyuan was a real man, but it was a pity that he was used by someone. At present, the situation of the Wu family and the Ma family was very delicate. Ma Jintian and Wu Jin hadn't married yet. Someone wanted to deal with him here? Who could it be, master? The banquet is about to begin. Madam has gone to the hall. Ling Imo whispered in his ear. Ling Li immediately came to himself and waved his hand. Let's go in. At this moment, on the other side of the courtyard, Zhao Shiyuan stood in front of a handsome young man in a golden robe. He said bitterly, Your Highness, Ling Li is really as bad as the rumor says. He is arrogant and domineering. He not only directly admitted those despicable things, but also threatened me. Does he really think that no one in the Dahan country can deal with him? The eyes of the young man in a golden robe flickered, and he looked calm. When he heard what Zhao Shiyuan said, he showed a friendly smile and said, Shiyuan, I know that you hate evil and dislike playboys like Ling Li, but after all, he is a member of the Ling family. As long as he doesn't make big mistakes, not to mention me, even my father can't deal with him easily. Don't worry. If there is a chance in the future, I won't let this cancer act recklessly in Yunjing. When Zhao Shiyuan heard the words, he was relieved and said excitedly, Your Highness is wise. I believe that day will not be too far away. Ho ho! The young man in a golden robe chuckled and said, The situation is not clear. It's better to say less. Shiyuan, you are the person I value. You have unique views on literary and military strategies, as well as governing the country and the people. No matter who will be the winner in the end, I hope that you can really use your views on the people. Hearing the sincere words of the young man in a golden robe, Zhao Shiyuan was excited and his eyes became red. He said excitedly, It is the right way for you to hold the ceremony in the Dahan country. I believe that your majesty will definitely make the best choice. The young man in a golden robe chuckled and didn't say yes or no. He changed the topic and said, Well, you go to the banquet first. Don't let your sister-in-law wait for a long time. I will come later. Then I'm leaving. Zhao Shiyuan came with a livid face, but he was happy when he left. The grievance brought by Ling Li had been resolved by the young man in a golden robe. How could a playboy compare with the future princess? If your highness could really ascend the throne, Ling Li would not be as comfortable as now. Watching Zhao Shiyuan leave, the smile on the face of the young man in a golden robe faded quickly and turned into deep doubt. Didn't he know that Ling Li begged the emperor to get married? He was the only prince who could move outside now. This person was the fifth prince, Dongfang Yang, the only one who benefited from the auction at the end of the year. Ling Li actually admitted it directly. Is he too lazy to explain, or something else? Why does father ask us to test Ling Li this time? What is his intention? All kinds of thoughts flashed through Dongfang Yang's mind. He really couldn't figure out why the emperor suddenly gave him such a strange order. However, this was a good opportunity for him to make a performance. The fourth sister suddenly held a banquet. She probably received the emperor's order. The eighth sister also came. Is it? Dongfang Yang's eyes flashed. Nowadays, among the descendants of the royal family, other princes were not a big threat to him. Even the first prince was under house arrest in the palace by the emperor. The first sister married a small country, the second sister disappeared for many years, and the eighth sister was still young. The only threat was the fourth sister. Although the emperor would definitely consider the princes first when passing the throne, he couldn't fail miserably. Before the emperor established the throne, he must do his best. Su Li and Gong Min accompanied each other to the banquet, which immediately attracted the attention of many men and women. Su Li's appearance was not a secret in Yunjing City. During the months when she taught in the affiliated school of the National Academy, someone painted her in private, hoping to copy the perfect appearance of Su Li in the painting. In the end, of course, it failed. But the person who painted the painting had some skills and drew some charm. As soon as the painting came out, people scrambled for it. Finally, it was bought by a mysterious person. Su Li in the painting was naturally remembered by many people. Although the banquet of the fourth princess lacked many rules, the distance of the seats still represented the status. Su Li was the daughter of the prince. Now, with the identity of Junwang Fei, the seat was naturally in the front. Gong Min was not qualified to sit here, so she had to separate from Su Li for the time being. As soon as Su Li sat down, someone wanted to come over and chat with her. However, Ling Li appeared in time with a smile on his face. He immediately extinguished all the thoughts. Seeing this, Ling Li didn't feel ashamed at all. Instead, he laughed and said, "My wife, although my name is not very good, isn't it to save trouble? Otherwise, these great talents will definitely surround and disturb you shamelessly." Ling Li didn't mean to lower his voice at all. Many childs at the banquet heard it clearly. For a moment, their faces were as black as the bottom of a pot. They were angry but didn't dare to say anything. But they all looked at Su Li at the same time. They wanted to see how the famous beauty in Yunjing would deal with it. With a faint smile on her face, Su Li nodded calmly and said, "You are right, my husband." As soon as Su Li said that, many people were dumbfounded. When a lady from a famous family saw this scene, she was a little less jealous. She smiled sarcastically and said, "Husband, didn't you say that Princess Li is pure and will certainly not succumb to the power of the Ling family? Why do I seem to follow your husband's lead?" Many people opened their mouths and didn't know how to refute. Su Li was indeed the goddess in the hearts of many talents in Yunjing City. But today, their goddess's performance really disappointed them. "Humph, you are a group of ordinary people who only look at the surface. What do you know? Princess Li doesn't care about Ling Li at all. She can be calm in front of such a playboy like Ling Li. Even we can't do that." Zhao Shiyuan said coldly. Many people immediately agreed with him. The lady who spoke rudely just now was about to refute. Suddenly, someone saw that Su Li turned her head and looked at Zhao Shiyuan. Although her expression was indifferent and didn't show much emotion, it didn't prevent them from interpreting it as gratitude. Princess Li looks at him. Zhao Shiyuan is right. He deserves to be the first in the Faculty of Arts last year. Everyone was amazed. The lady had to swallow her words. She was so angry that she secretly stamped her feet. She looked at Su Li with more and more disgust. Chapter 278. Everyone looked along the footsteps and saw a beautiful woman in a palace dress and a young man in a golden robe. They were surrounded by more than a dozen people. The man in a golden robe was Dongfang Yang, whom Zhao Shiyuan met before, and the woman in a palace dress was the hostess of this banquet, fourth Princess Dongfang Yuyan. For a time, many juniors of lower status immediately stood up and saluted. "Greetings, fourth Princess and His Royal Highness the fifth Prince." The woman in a palace dress smiled and waved her sleeves. Her gentle voice spread around the banquet. "Today is just a private banquet. Don't be so polite. Sit down." "Thank you, fourth Princess." After everyone was seated, fourth Princess glanced at the banquet. Finally, she paused at the seats of Su Li and Ling Li. Then she turned to Dongfang Yang and said with a smile, "I didn't expect that, fourth brother. You are so busy. You have time to attend my banquet. I'm really flattered." Dongfang Yang laughed and said, "Don't regard me as an outsider. It's my duty to support you." Dongfang Yuyan nodded and said no more. Of course, she knew that Dongfang Yang was not here to support her, but she didn't want to offend her fifth brother for a credit. "Let me propose a toast to everyone first." Dongfang Yuyan picked up the wine glass and said with a smile, "You are all newlyweds in Yunjing City in recent years. I wish you a happy life together." Many people were excited when they got the blessing of the princess. They picked up the wine glass and drank it up. They said in unison, "Thank you, princess." Su Li also picked up the wine glass and took a sip. She respected Dongfang Yuyan. But Ling Li was eating and drinking by himself. He didn't pay attention to Dongfang Yuyan at all. His position was extremely close to the front. Of course, his performance was spoiled. Noticing that everyone was looking at him, Ling Li raised his head and laughed. His mouth was full of food, which was very unappetizing. Even Su Li turned her head away without a trace. Dongfang Yuyan hated Ling Li because of what happened in the past. Now she saw that Lingli didn't change at all. She frowned slightly and then relaxed instantly. She said with a smile, "Brother Ling, are you reincarnated as a hungry ghost? Don't choke when you eat like this." Hearing Dongfang Yuyin's sarcasm, everyone was nervous. The lively banquet immediately quieted down. Cough, cough. Lingli seemed to be choked. He couldn't stop coughing. He grabbed the teacup in front of Su Li and drank it up. Then he hammered his chest a few times to catch his breath. He clicked his tongue and said, "Sister Yuyin, why haven't you cured your jinx after so many years?" Seeing that Lingli dared to talk about the past, Dongfang Yuyin's face immediately darkened. Her chest rose and fell violently for several times before she calmed down. She turned her head and glanced at Su Li, who looked a little embarrassed. She felt a little better and snorted, "Well, for the sake of Sister Su Li, I won't argue with you today." With that, she clapped her hands lightly, and a group of dancers floated into the garden. They danced in the middle of the banquet, accompanied by the gentle melody coming from behind the fake mountain. Su Li looked at the dance floor and tasted the osmanthus wine. The banquet held by Dongfang Yuyin was really sincere. The wine used was the first-class osmanthus wine of the Linli building. It cost millions of taels of silver. "Honey, how was my performance today?" Lingli suddenly leaned over and blew in her ear. His eyes were fixed on Su Li's bulging chest. His eyes seemed to be glowing. He almost reached out to touch it. An idea flashed in Su Li's mind, and she already understood Lingli's meaning. She was a little ashamed and annoyed. She moved away imperceptibly. Tears appeared in her bright eyes, which seemed to be full of grievances. The man sitting next to Lingli saw this scene and got angry immediately. If Lingli didn't fail because of his inconvenience, he would rush forward to slap the playboy. At the same time, several people sighed in their hearts when they saw this scene. Third Master Ling was such a lecherous playboy. It was so pitiful that Princess Li fell into his hands. Dongfang Yuyin and Dongfang Yang saw this scene, but they were lost in thought at the same time. "Father asked me to invite Lingli and Su Li to come here on the pretext of the banquet. Most of the purpose is to test them. I also see it. They seem to be in harmony, but they are actually in discord. Although Su Li has always shown a very obedient appearance, her grievances and dissatisfaction can't be hidden from me." Dongfang Yuyin sneered in her heart. What was father worried about? Did he really think that Lingli and Su Li really loved each other, and that the Ling family and Lord Rue's mansion would sincerely cooperate for great things? The Ling family had always disliked the Dongfang family. Uncle Rue cared about his daughter and had long been dissatisfied with Lingli. Now the Ling family and Lord Rue's mansion might have been hostile to each other because of the marriage. Father was also old and muddled. He couldn't see through such a situation. It was better to pass the throne to her. As for the fifth brother, Dongfang Yuyin turned her head and glanced at Dongfang Yang lightly. Dongfang Yang seemed to feel it. He turned his head and showed a gentle and bright smile. "Fourth sister, is there anything on my face?" Dongfang Yuyin was shocked and said with a smile, "Nothing. I just feel that you are more and more handsome these years. You must have fascinated many young ladies from aristocratic families. I don't know if you have a suitable one in mind. The position of princess can't always be empty, right?" "You are right, sister." Dongfang Yang nodded and said with a smile, "However, I think that a man should focus on his career. There is no need to rush to get married." Dongfang Yuyin's smile was slightly stiff. She felt that Dongfang Yang's words had a hidden meaning. But at this moment, the sound of the zither behind the rockery suddenly became impassioned. The dancers heard it and stopped dancing. They stood in the middle in panic and confusion. Why did the musicians suddenly change their tune out of the blue? Dongfang Yuyin's face changed. She stood up and shouted softly, "Who dares to make trouble at my banquet? Come out!" Clang! The sound of the zither behind the rockery stopped immediately. Then, a girl who looked no older than 13 or 14 years old hopped out. Her big bright eyes were filled with innocence. She looked at all the stunned guests in the audience, but she was not surprised at all. She patted her chest and showed a sweet and innocent expression. "You mortals, listen to my fairy music. Kneel down and thank me." Dongfang Yuyin came to her sense and immediately didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Eighth sister, don't make trouble. The arrogant girl who came suddenly was Dongfang Huan, the eighth princess of the royal family mentioned by Dongfang Yang before. Fourth sister. Dongfang Huan-er's eyes were bright. She trotted into Dongfang Yuyin's arms and snorted discontentedly. You held such a lively banquet, but you didn't take me to play. Huan-er is very angry. Dongfang Yuyin's eyes were full of love. She smiled helplessly. You came uninvited. Did you sneak out of the palace? Dongfang Huan-er immediately covered her mouth guiltily and stopped talking. Her naive attitude instantly washed away the dissatisfaction in everyone's heart. It turned out that she was the famous naughty eighth princess. Now they saw her with their own eyes, and they all felt that the eighth princess was very simple and lovely. Suli looked at Dongfang Huan-er, who acted like a spoiled child in Dongfang Yuyin's arms, and frowned slightly. She had never seen Dongfang Huan-er before, but she felt that she was very familiar with her. Besides, her intuition that Dongfang Huan-er's nonsense was true. What's wrong? Don't be in a daze. Dongfang Huan-er is talking to you. Lingli transmitted the sound in silence suddenly. Suli was suddenly shocked and came to her senses. She saw Dongfang Huan-er pointing at her and saying, Are you Suli from the eighth uncle's family? I heard that you are the first talented girl in Yunjing City in the palace. You are good at zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting. But you are only 16 years old. Even if you started to learn in your mother's womb, you can't be an all-rounder, right? I don't believe it. Huan-er, don't be rude. You should call her sister. Dongfang Yuyin frowned slightly. Why did this girl suddenly start to target Suli? In fact, she had a good impression of Suli and even sympathized with her. Compared with her husband, Lingli was obviously worse. Dongfang Huan-er snorted and reluctantly called, Sister Suli. Suli heard it and smiled slightly. Her red lips slightly opened. Her clear and sweet voice echoed in the forest garden. Sister Huan-er is right. Although I have studied for a few years and learned skills for a few years, I can't be the first talented girl in Yunjing City. As soon as she said that, many people who were still fascinated by her voice were immediately shocked. Someone immediately defended her. Princess Li, why do you say that? Your teaching in the affiliated school of the National Academy is more wonderful and erudite than that of the old teacher in the National Academy. All of us can see that. You deserve the title of the first talented girl. Yes, yes. I heard that you used to be the workshop owner of the embroidery workshop in the Qinghe province. Your embroidery skills are also top. You are the best embroidery artificer at the age of 16 in the whole Dahan country. More than that, I heard that you are also good at cooking. The famous beggar's chicken in Yunjing City was created by you. Many people who didn't know Suli were confused. At the same time, they doubted whether the sources of the news were true or false. There were too many people fishing for fame. Suli could win the favor of all men in Yunjing City with her beautiful face. Did she need to learn those things? Dongfang Huan-er saw so many people standing up to speak for Suli. It seemed that she was humiliated. She became angry and said, Everyone says you are good. I don't believe it. Since you are proficient in zither, chess, calligraphy, and painting, do you dare to compete with me in zither skills? After she said that, the noise in the field immediately quieted down. Many people looked at Suli with a touch of expectation in their eyes. If they could appreciate Suli's music, their trip would be worthwhile, and they would have the capital to brag in front of their friends in the future. Before Suli spoke, a rude voice suddenly sounded and disrupted Dongfang Huan-er's rhythm. What do you mean? Little girl, how dare you ask my wife to compete with you in zither? It is enough for me to listen to my wife's music. How can I let you ordinary people listen to it? Do you deserve it? Chapter 279. Dongfang Huan-er was extremely favored. She was born with a golden spoon in her mouth. She had never been looked down upon like this. Her eyes turned red immediately. She grabbed the corner of Dongfang Yuyin's clothes with one hand. She was so angry that she almost cried. She said angrily like an angry lion, "Ling Li, you bastard! You will die a horrible death. Sister, do you see him bully me like this? Help me get justice." Dongfang Yuyan's expression changed slightly. She quickly stopped Dongfang Huan. Some words couldn't be said casually. For Ling Li, the most taboo was to curse him to death. After all, people with disabled legs couldn't practice martial arts because of blocked tendons and veins. Their life was very short. Dongfang Yuyan comforted her sister and looked up at Ling Li. As expected, she saw anger flashing in his eyes. She didn't know what trouble he was going to make. Considering the overall situation, Dongfang Yuyan had to bite her teeth and said, "Huan, you are too serious. Apologize to your brother Ling Li." "Apologize? Brother Ling Li?" Dongfang Huan's eyes immediately widened. Was this the fourth sister who always loved and took care of her? At this moment, Dongfang Yang suddenly said, "I think what my sister said is not unreasonable. Ling Li, sister-in-law's talent should not be buried for anyone. You want to put everything of sister-in-law on the shelf for your own selfishness. Isn't it too much?" "What?" Ling Li frowned suddenly. Dongfang Yang's words were really vicious. He included righteousness in a few words. If he continued to pester endlessly, it might cause everyone to condemn him. Thinking of this, he glanced at other people's faces. As expected, many people were angry and had bad intentions. Although he had long been accustomed to this scene, if he continued to insist, it was not the quality that a playboy who bullied the weak and feared the strong should have. Subconsciously, he wanted to transmit the sound to Su Li to ask for her opinion. But before he took any action, Su Li transmitted the sound to him first. "Agree with him. Beg me." Ling Li was so smart that he immediately understood Su Li's meaning. But the transmission was so straightforward that he couldn't help but be angry. His expression didn't escape the eyes of others, but it happened to be in line with the helplessness of being forced. After a while, Ling Li's expression softened. He turned his head and whispered in Su Li's ear, "Honey, I also think what the fifth prince said is reasonable. Why don't you play a song for him today?" Ling Li's voice was very low, but almost everyone present had cultivation. They heard Ling Li's words clearly and immediately had a more intuitive impression of the third master of the Ling family. He gave in. He gave in just like that. As expected, he was a spineless coward who bullied the weak and feared the strong. Zhao Shiyuan frowned, his heart burning with anger. Why does the fifth prince force Princess Li to compete with eighth princess? Even I can see that Princess Li is unwilling. Although Ling Li is a little selfish, he also helped Princess Li accidentally. If fifth prince didn't say that, Gu Shiju said, Princess Li is not willing to do that. He couldn't figure out why Dongfang Yang, whom he had high hopes for, behaved like a playboy like Ma Jintian instead of a gentleman. His words were despicable. Could it be that he was wrong? For the first time, he wavered in his belief. But soon he was desperate. Except for the fifth prince, who else in the royal family could make him fulfill his ambition and sacrifice his blood? It turned out that he had long known that there was only one choice in front of him. Su Li heard Ling Li's words. Although her expression was still calm, she couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. The disappointment was not obvious, but it was just caught by Dongfang Yuyan and Dongfang Yang. Immediately, both of them slightly raised their lips. It seemed that they had great confidence in the relationship between Ling Li and Su Li. Since eighth princess invited me, there is no reason for me to refuse. But I am not proficient in the zither. Let's not compete and play a song for tonight's banquet. Su Li's voice was gentle and soft. It seemed that there was a magical power to calm the hostility in everyone's heart. Her reasonable words were also admirable. In such a situation, Princess Li could take the overall situation into consideration and didn't fall out with Ling Li. She was really not an ordinary woman. Zhao Shiyuan's eyes flashed with deep admiration. He suddenly stood up and cupped his hands. Princess Li is reasonable, which is really commendable. We have no regret to listen to your zither. How dare we ask for more? Zhao Shiyuan said what many people thought. Someone immediately echoed, "Yes, yes. Child Zhao is right. I really admire Princess Li's state of mind. Even if she is not proficient in the zither, I believe that we can also gain something from the zither. Princess Li, please. We are all ears. Seeing such a scene, Dongfang Yang and Dongfang Yin's heart sank. They only tried to test the relationship between Su Li and Su Li, but ignored her personal charm. Now, being forced by them, Su Li's noble character of being pure in the mud was highlighted. Immediately, this group of scholars who read books were willing to be loyal to Su Li. Is it because of her nature, or because she is scheming? Dongfang Yang was full of doubts. It was the first time for him to get close to Su Li, so he couldn't help but be a little confused. At this time, Su Li had already sat behind the zither behind the rockery. A group of musicians around her stood far away with expectation. The whole banquet hall was also quiet. Even if people ate, they chewed slowly for fear that the sound would disturb Su Li's zither. In such a waiting, Su Li's beautiful eyes were slightly gloomy. Her eyelashes under the stone lamp trembled slightly. Her fingertips stroked the zither strings one by one. In the previous life, before Lingli was alive, she didn't learn zither. After Lingli died, she fell into the evil circle and it was impossible for her to learn zither. Until she met Jing Xian, she calmed down and learned a lot of elegant things that she was not qualified to master. Thinking of this, clang, the zither strings vibrated, and a soothing tone like a clear spring flowed out. An extremely sad emotion also passed into everyone's heart along with the tone. This is the business from the heart and the music from the heart? Dongfang Huan was shocked and slightly opened her mouth. She was no longer arrogant. This was the highest realm of the zither circle. In this realm, the superficial level of zither skills was nothing. What really touched people's hearts were the feelings contained in the music. Even the master who had been teaching her in the imperial palace was far less emotional than Su Li. Dongfang Huan stared blankly at the direction blocked by the rockery. Then she looked at the people in the banquet hall who were intoxicated by the zither and burst into tears. She sighed and couldn't compare with Su Li anymore. She still remembered the master's words and knew what a genius Su Li was. If Su Li intended to enter the circle with zither, she was likely to break through the inborn realm before the age of 20 and become a young master. Dongfang Huan couldn't help sweating on her forehead. She secretly breathed a sigh of relief. Fortunately, both Su Li and the Ling family and Lord Rui's mansion had very shallow knowledge. As long as she went back and told her father, the news tonight should not be exposed. Dongfang Huan was relaxed. She inadvertently caught a glimpse of Ling Li's moved expression and was in a trance. She couldn't help but laugh secretly. She didn't expect that this idiot, who was full of women, could have some reaction. It was really hard for him. She didn't think about it carefully. Then she also immersed herself in the zither and absorbed the inspiration from it. She would definitely make great progress in the circle of zither. Ling Li stared blankly at the direction of the rockery. It seemed that his eyes could penetrate the rockery and fall on the beautiful figure who was playing the zither. Although he had never heard this song, he was familiar with it from the bottom of his heart. It seemed that he had heard it somewhere before. Such a strange thing would make him full of speculations in normal times. But now he just wanted to immerse himself in the sad zither sound and feel the message passed by Su Li. Su Li closed her eyes. She moved her hands according to her heart. She didn't need to deliberately control it. Who thinks of the heaven and earth? Can't predict the movement of the earth? Living with the heaven and earth for a long time. The hair on the temples is like frost. Infatuated with the universe and the wilderness, looking forward to the passing of winter and summer, I wish the years will pass and the autumn harvest, hidden in the winter longing for the dew, has turned into frost, looking forward to where you are now, wishing to go to the killing field with hatred, punishing the evildoers, or returning with the emperor and dying. Only the old wine, how can I bear the red candlelight, is cold, looking forward to my return. My soul is wandering hand in hand with you. You have not returned, can't bear to see the stars and the mansions. Who has read the 1,000-word essay Autumn Harvest and Winter Hide? On the way to Hellas, it a long way to go alone. Hate, only hate. I can't accompany you on this trip, my husband. What is this book? Isn't the dictionary of Dahan enough for me to learn words? It's not enough. I want you to write this down. 1,000-word classic? Yes, it's an essay from my hometown. There is only one in the world. Seeing her husband showing a rare proud look, the disfigured wife nodded with a smile even though she didn't believe it. Darling, you are right. The heaven and earth are mysterious and yellow. The universe is primitive. The sun and the moon are full. Darling, what is this word? This word is to be read. Don't be anxious. I will accompany you every day until you can understand the thousands of books in the world. Darling, clang. At the end of the song, Suli slowly put down her hands. Tears had wet her face unconsciously. She took a deep breath and ran the genuine energy to dry the tears. Then she calmed down. Perhaps it was because there were too many things weighing down on her heart that she had been living a very depressing life. Now, through this piece of music, she had vented some of it and felt a lot more relaxed. When Suli walked out from behind the rockery, everyone suddenly came to their senses. They suddenly found that they had shed tears, and the sadness lingered in their hearts for a long time. Dongfang Yuyin and Dongfang Yang were also not spared. No matter how evil they were, everyone had a soft spot in their heart. Princess Li's song really surprised me. There is such a fairy song in the world. We are embarrassed. Dongfang Yuyin wiped her tears and adjusted herself quickly. She said first. Dongfang Yang hadn't come out of the sadness. He nodded absent-mindedly and was no longer in high spirits. Listening to Princess Li's song is better than reading a book of sages. I have a difficult thing in my heart, but after listening to this song, I have the answer. Now I can't wait to implement it. Fourth Princess, goodbye. Princess Li untied the knot in my heart. I can only repay you later. My wife, I want to go back to my hometown. Would you like to go with me? Princess Li, thank you. The banquet was noisy, but there was no sense of impetuosity. Everyone was grateful to Suli and left with complicated feelings. After this song, the banquet obviously couldn't go on. Suli responded with a faint smile and sent people away one after another. She was at peace. The crisis tonight finally passed. Chapter 280. The guests who hadn't left were shocked. Dongfang Yuyin reacted in time and shouted, "Where are the guards?" Swish, swish. The royal guards hiding around the garden immediately showed up. The heavy cavalry brought people a strong sense of security and immediately calmed down the commotion. Suli glanced around and saw an acquaintance. Hu Daiden of the royal guards, the former subordinate of Wu Bin. Commander Hu, take people outside to see what happened, Dongfang Yuyin hurriedly ordered. Hu Daiden didn't dare to delay and immediately rushed out of the courtyard. After a while, he came back with an ugly face. Fourth Princess, something happened. Dongfang Yuyin's face changed slightly and she followed him out. The guests behind her didn't dare to leave the protection range of the royal guards and followed her closely. Suli pushed Ling Li's wheelchair and came last. At a glance, she saw the corpse lying on the ground. She thought for a moment and remembered the identity of this person. She was a miss from an ordinary aristocratic family. However, the face of this miss now looked more like an old woman. Her whole body was pale, as if her blood had been sucked dry by something. Many misses from aristocratic families turned their heads and hid in their husbands' arms, shivering. Such a horrible death made even Hu Daiden, who had seen a lot of ferocious things in these years, couldn't help but feel cold. Dongfang Yuyin realized the seriousness of the situation. She meditated for a while and said decisively, "Contact the Supreme Judiciary and let them come to take over the case immediately. In addition, Commander Hu, please escort the guests at my banquet home. Don't make any mistakes." Dongfang Yuyin's worry was reasonable. No one knew whether the murderer was still hiding around. It was easy to deal with the family of the dead woman who was not powerful. But if one or two powerful juniors of the family died, it would be really a big deal. Maybe it would cause a storm like the child of the Ma family last time. Fourth Princess, don't worry. This is the fault of the royal guards. I will not let the same thing happen again. Hu Daiden solemnly nodded his head and immediately gave the order. One by one, the couples left under his meticulous arrangements. The Ling family's status was respected, so they naturally received special attention from Hu Daden. He assigned 2 small teams to escort them away. Ling Yimo and Yun Yi naturally wouldn't say anything, although they all knew that if the hidden murderer was really more powerful than the 2 people in the sedan chair, the 2 pairs of guards couldn't stop him at all. The sky wasn't dark yet, and there were pedestrians walking on the road from time to time. It seemed calm and peaceful, and there was nothing unusual about it. Although Lingli wanted to ask about the music, he had to focus on it first because of what had happened. He transmitted the sound. "You are proficient in pharmacology." "What do you think about the corpse?" Suli glanced at Lingli lightly and shook her head. She didn't speak. Lingli frowned slightly and glanced at Suli's arm. With his eyesight, he could vaguely see the scab wound through the gauze. He had an intuition that Suli became extremely thrifty after marriage. What she saved was not money, but genuine energy. It was clear that genuine energy could speed up the healing of wounds, but she would rather keep the wounds to heal themselves. And the transmission of sound. The transmission of sound consumed very little genuine energy, almost negligible. But when Suli went to the banquet with him, she only transmitted a short message when Dongfang Yang forced her. Why was that? No matter how hard he thought, he couldn't figure out why the genuine energy was saved. The hidden pneuma in Suli's body was obviously closer to the longevity realm than his. Only Suli knew that she was in a state of only using strength. Every time she used her strength, she would be 1 step closer to death. If it wasn't necessary, she didn't want to waste a bit of foundation. The carriage returned to the Ling mansion safely. The captain of the royal guards who escorted them said some polite words and left. Suli and Ling Yimo were caught by Chiu Ming for a while, and then they returned to the east courtyard to restore peace. After a rest, Yun Yi and Ling Yimo kept watch outside the study. Suli brought a cup of tea to prevent Chiu Ming from checking. Then she sat next to the bookshelf and said inexplicably, "Although I learned from the miracle-working doctor, the miracle-working doctor is not a coroner. I just took a look at him. What can I think? However, there are countless books in your cult. Maybe there are records of evil martial arts similar to this." Lingli raised his eyebrows slightly and realized that Suli was answering his question on the carriage. Although her voice was still cold, he heard some worry in her words. It seemed that Li had a guess in her heart. Thinking of this, Lingli immediately asked Ling Yimo to call Ling Qinglan and asked him to consult the classics in the cult. At the same time, he was more convinced of one thing. Suli was indeed saving the use of genuine energy. Could it be that the rain that day had left behind some sort of aftereffect? Recalling the situation at that time, Lingli was shocked. He only cared about dealing with the contradiction between him and Suli, but he ignored a very important point. That day, Li was seriously injured. Lingli looked up at Suli, who still had her back to him. He wanted to ask several times, but he was finally dispelled by Suli's deliberate indifference. He knew that even if he asked, he wouldn't get an answer. At this moment, he suddenly remembered that the third elder wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. It seemed that there was something hidden from him. In the middle of the night, Let's Talk in the Spiritual Realm, Jing Xine. After reading it, Suli immediately got up and left the Ling mansion from the secret passage. After many days, the Ling mansion had been used to her existence. It was much more convenient for her to move. She didn't need to be as troublesome as before. This time, Suli came to the stronghold of the spiritual realm from the Linli building without alarming anyone. When she just arrived at the door, she saw Chu Xiao greeting her respectfully. He saluted and said, "Senior, Great Lord has been waiting for you on the top floor for a long time." Suli nodded gently. "Please lead the way." "Senior, you're welcome," Chu Xiao said politely. He didn't dare to neglect and quickly led Suli in. At this moment, he was much more respectful than before. Although he reported Suli's news without delay, Great Lord came to Dahan country in person after a few days, which made him immediately realize that Suli's identity was more terrible than he imagined. After sending Suli to the attic on the top floor, Chu Xiao left consciously. Suli's heart beat slightly faster. She stepped forward and opened the door. A woman in white with her back to her immediately came into view. Sensing Su Li's coming, she turned around and showed a face. This face could be said to be extremely ordinary without any beauty, but it was not ugly. It could only be said to be ordinary and inconspicuous. If she was put into the crowd, she would be immediately drowned by people and couldn't make any waves. However, such an ordinary woman with no sense of existence at this moment gave Su Li the feeling that she was faintly integrated into the nothingness, as if she was not in the mortal world but standing in the fairy land. "You finally think of me." The woman smiled slightly, and the first sentence revealed a lot of things. Su Li didn't know why. After seeing Jing Xian, she immediately calmed down. It was a sense of peace that no one could give her. This feeling was exactly the same as in the previous life. Hearing Jing Xian's words, Su Li also chuckled. "Jing Xian, you still remember me?" The relationship between her and Jing Xian was unclear. In the previous life, she was saved by Jing Xian. She was so grateful and even wanted to follow her. But Jing Xian asked her to treat her as a friend. Later, after getting along with her, she and Jing Xian became more like a teacher and a friend. Therefore, Su Li directly called Jing Xian by her name. Chapter 281. Broken Ring. This was the first time that Su Li heard this word from the mouth of someone outside Mei Ruhan's consciousness. She nodded slightly to admit it. Seeing Jing Xian's joyful look quickly become gloomy and sad, she was stunned. A sense of déjà vu emerged in her heart. It seemed that she had known Jing Xian a long time ago, even earlier than the previous life. "And it seems that you know a lot." Su Li's tone was very calm. Now that the situation was established, although she had doubts in her heart, her desire to explore the cause and effect was not strong. What could she do even if she knew? If she couldn't be revived, everything would be illusory. After more than an hour, Jing Xian calmed down. The sadness on her face faded away and was replaced by determination. Just as she was about to say something, the nothingness suddenly shook violently. The cracks in the nothingness tore directly and formed a black hole in the blink of an eye. The horrible and violent pneuma swept out with a warning. Su Li's pupils shrank suddenly, and her hair stood on end. The power that suddenly appeared was like the power of heaven. Only a wisp of it was enough to make her body collapse and disappear. This was definitely not the power of the longevity realm. Even the legendary supernatural realm could not directly tear the nothingness and form a black hole. What level of power was this? Su Li's scalp was cold. She looked at Jing Xian, but there was no fear on her face. Instead, she was furious. "Warning? By now, you old things still think that I will care about any warning?" Jing Xian sneered again and again. Her voice was cold. She waved her sleeves and the black hole was closed directly. A ray of pure light that Su Li couldn't notice shot into the black hole before it was closed. Then, a miserable howl came out. Even though the nothingness had returned to its original state, Su Li could still hear it clearly. Seeing such a magical scene beyond her imagination, Su Li was shocked, but not shocked. She had a vague feeling that she once had this kind of means in her memory. Outside the nothingness, a spiritual body suddenly collapsed and lost its mind. Numerous angry and embarrassed voices resounded, and there were young and old, men and women amongst them, and there were actually no less than 1,000 of them. "How dare you? This realm spirit only has a trace of spiritual wisdom after we carefully cultivated it for 10 years. Jing Xian dared to kill it." Elder Emochin, since Jing Xian took the initiative to take action, the previous agreement, "How dare you? It must be your people who cheated in secret and violated the agreement," which completely annoyed Jing Xian. Otherwise, how could Jing Xian suddenly kill you regardless of your master's safety? What a joke. This treasure belongs to your Yushu sect. How can we find it? Don't tell me you want me to mention it a second time. You're just a woman. I can't be bothered to bicker with you. Once this world is over, we'll settle this. Along with this cold grunt, the surroundings quietened down, but a strand of uneasiness lingered in Elder Imochi's heart, causing her to frown with worry. Why did the people of Zihan's sect suddenly become so easy to talk to? Could it be that something really happened in the mirror? Let's not talk about the debate outside the nothingness. At this moment, Suli looked at Jing Xian, who was kneeling in front of her, and couldn't help but feel shocked. Jing Xian, the dignified lord of the spiritual realm, had a high status. For Suli, she was more like a master. She should kneel to Jing Xian. But just kneeling was obviously not the focus of Jing Xian's determination. What she said next made Suli fall into a sluggish state. Master, Jing Xian is guilty. Master? Suli seemed to think that she had an auditory hallucination. She confirmed again. You, call me Master? Master, I have been with you for 900 years. How can I be wrong? 900 years? Suli was silent. She lived no more than 50 years in her 2 lives. But if what Jing Xian said was true, the origin of the foundation in the bracelet could be explained a little. Jing Xian saw the strangeness and doubt in Suli's eyes, and she couldn't help but feel bitter. She had become the spirit of the treasure, so she naturally knew the characteristics of this treasure better. As long as Suli didn't go out for a day, the original memory would not appear. Even so, Jing Xian couldn't help but say, "You are Suli, the first holy girl of Yushu sect, the first sect in Jiuzhou region. There are too many reasons. You don't have original memory now, so I can't explain it clearly. But I can't figure out why you broke the bracelet?" Jing Xian said with tears in her eyes, "Although the life bracelet can save your life, it also has a fatal drawback. You broke the bracelet on your own initiative, so there is only one result. Will my soul be destroyed?" Suli suddenly said in a calm tone. Jing Xian opened her eyes widely. "You know it. But why?" Suli shook her head. "It's too late to know all this now. Have you heard the name Mei Ruhan?" Mei Ruhan. Jing Xian's eyes immediately brightened, and she showed extreme hatred. "Master, Mei Ruhan is your junior sister apprentice. She is the second inherited disciple of Yushu sect. Although she doesn't have the title of holy girl like you, her cultivation has reached the Jindan realm. You can't underestimate her. Master, is it because of her that you changed?" Suli was thoughtful. There was a lot of unrevealed information in her words. At this moment, she didn't know why she suddenly thought of what the old beggar said when she first came to Yunjing City. Sure enough, the world is fake, and people can't be counted. The world is fake. Could it be that this world is fake at all? Jing Xian, where is the Jiuzhou region that you told me? I have lived 2 lives. Why have I never heard of it? Jing Xian was embarrassed when she heard the words. It seemed that she was considering whether her master, who had lost all her memories, could accept it if she told the truth. Seeing Jing Xian's reaction, Suli narrowed her eyes and said slowly, "Is it possible that there are other worlds besides this one?" Jing Xian was shocked when she heard the words, "Master, do you remember it?" Suli shook her head. "I do feel a little familiar with you, but I just feel familiar with you. I have no impression of the Jiuzhou region and Yushu sect that you mentioned." Jing Xian couldn't help but show a touch of disappointment, but she quickly recovered and said quickly, "Master, the spiritual body outside was used to monitor me. Although it was killed by me, it will soon appear again. The truth can't be told in 3 days and 3 nights. We don't have so much time, so we have to make a long story short. To be exact, this world is not a world at all, but an illusory realm created by a treasure. The outside world is the real world. As for the name of that world, I don't know. This treasure is called the Reincarnation Mirror. In those days, this treasure made many forces jealous, and they attacked Yushu sect together. Because of the disaster of destroying the sect, you had to choose to take the risk and open the Reincarnation Mirror. You let all the young people in the Jiuzhou region enter it and made an agreement to compete for the dominance of the Reincarnation Mirror according to their abilities. At that time, you were already the half-owner of the Reincarnation Mirror. From the beginning, the whole dreamland revolved around you. However, I don't know what method Zihan sect used, but they forcibly transferred the qi to Su Zipei of their sect, which caused your fate to plummet and you suffered a lot. I was your servant. At that time, the situation was critical, So I had to sacrifice myself. Speaking of this, suddenly there was a slight fluctuation in the nothingness. Jing Xian's face changed slightly, and her voice stopped abruptly. She waved a gentle force to send Su Li out of the spiritual realm. At the same time, Jing Xian's last words came to her ears. Master, since you have broken the bracelet, you don't have to worry about what to do. Leave the outside world to me. After the voice came out, the scene in front of Su Li changed. She was already in a quiet, broken temple. The morning sun shone through the cracks on the roof, which seemed quiet and soft. But at this moment, Su Li was more confused and complicated than ever. Jing Xian could kill the existence of tearing the nothingness with a wave of her hand. There was no need for her to lie to herself. What she said was probably true, but if what she said was true, everything that she had always believed in and stuck to would be subverted with the end of this life. Everything in the illusion, including relatives, friends, even Lingli, was fake. Then what was the point of continuing? At this moment, Su Li fell into a confusion that she had never experienced before. 2 days had passed unconsciously. In the past 2 days, except that the Supreme Judiciary was very busy, the Linli building, the Ima cult, and the Dongfang family were all very calm. The sudden appearance of the evil circle made all forces in Yunjing City not as tense as before, and they had a chance to breathe. However, everyone in the game knew that when the murderer was caught, the ensuing waves would be more turbulent. Li, you have been restless these days. Did this brat bully you? During the dinner, Xiaoming asked with concern. Lingli stopped eating and looked up at Su Li. Even his mother could see that Su Li was in a bad state. So could he. But no matter how he asked, Su Li didn't answer and looked at him strangely, as if she was confirming something. Facing Xiaoming's question, Su Li was still rational. Finally, she didn't ignore her. She forced a smile and said, "Mother, I'm fine. I just miss home recently." I see. Xiaoming suddenly understood. She thought of the hardships that Su Li had suffered since she was a child. She couldn't help but feel distressed. She said, "It's my negligence. You and your father just met each other, and then you married here. You should miss home. Tomorrow, Lingli will accompany you to visit your family. It doesn't matter if you stay for a few more days." "Thank you, Mother." Seeing that Su Li agreed and smiled, Xiaoming was relieved and didn't care about it anymore. The next morning, Xiaoming ordered people to prepare carriages and guards and let Lingli accompany her to the Lord Rue's mansion. Dongfang Rue was overjoyed to see his daughter coming back. He quickly asked Wu Bin to arrange a family banquet. The food was the best of the Baisho building. Even if it was simply processed, it would be delicious. What's more, it was the chief chef of the Baisho building who prepared it. Lingli also stopped acting and paid a formal visit to his father-in-law, which relieved Dongfang Rue's worries and made him feel gratified. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.